Welcome, whether this is your first visit or you've joined us before. This video contains long, immersive ghost stories and haunted encounters, perfect for relaxing and falling asleep. If you enjoy the stories, like, subscribe, and comment your location below. Get comfortable, breathe slowly, and let's begin. Story 1. I took a job as a night watchman at a remote hospice. The patients haven't moved in years, but their shadows do. The advertisement was taped to the window of a laundromat in a town that barely registered on Google Maps. It was a single sheet of yellowed paper, curled at the edges, written in the frantic, jagged loops of an old typewriter. Night caretaker, needed, St. Jude's Palliative Care Center. No medical experience required. $500 per night. Cash. $500 a night for a college dropout drowning in student loans and driving a Honda Civic that sounded like it was gargling gravel. That kind of money wasn't just appealing. It was a lifeline. I didn't question why the pay was so high for a job that required zero skills. I didn't question why a hospice was hiring via a laundromat flyer. Desperation has a way of putting blinders on a man. I called the number. A woman answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. She didn't ask for my name, my references, or my background. She just asked if I could stay awake from sundown to sunup. When I said yes, she gave me an address and told me to be there by 8 p.m. sharp. The drive took 2 hours. I left the interstate and turned onto a state highway, then a county road, and finally a gravel track that wound its way up into the dense, suffocating pine forests of the Cascades. The trees were tall here, ancient things that blotted out the twilight, creating a tunnel of shadows that seemed to swallow my headlights. The deeper I drove, the heavier the air felt. My ears popped. The radio static grew louder until it drowned out the music, forcing me to drive in silence. St. Jude's wasn't a hospital. It was a manor house, a Victorian monstrosity of dark wood and stone perched on a cliff edge overlooking a valley of black mist. It had turrets and gables and windows that looked like heavy-lidded eyes. The ivy climbing the walls was dead, a brown, skeletal web choking the masonry. I parked my car in the gravel circle. The engine sputtered and died before I even turned the key. Silence rushed in to fill the void, a heavy ringing silence that felt pressurized. The front door opened before I reached the steps. A woman stood there. She was impossibly tall, wearing a stiff gray nurse's uniform that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. Her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it pulled the skin of her face taut, giving her a permanent skull-like grin. "You're late," she said. Her lips didn't seem to move enough to form the words. "It's 7:58, I said, checking my watch. "Time flows differently at altitude," she replied cryptically. She stepped aside. "Come in. Do not let the heat out." I stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of a hospital, no antiseptic or bleach. It smelled of lavender, heavy and cloying, masking something underneath. Something sweet and rotten, like spoiled meat, buried under a bouquet of flowers. The air was stiflingly hot. The radiator pipes running along the walls hissed and clanked rhythmically. "I am Matron Halloway," she said, locking the heavy oak door behind me. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. "You are here to watch the third floor, the west wing." "Just the third floor?" I asked. "The other floors are dormant," she said. She didn't elaborate. She handed me a heavy iron ring with 3 keys. The brass key opens a stairwell. The silver key opens a supply closet. The black key... You must never use the black key. It is for the basement. There is nothing in the basement that concerns you. Do you understand? Yes, I lied. I was already curious. Your duties are simple, she continued, leading me up a grand staircase where the carpet was worn threadbare in a distinct path up the center. Walk the hall, check the doors, ensure the residents remain in their beds. If the boiler acts up, bleed the radiator in the hallway, not the rooms. And most importantly, she stopped on the landing, turning to face me. Her eyes were a milky pale blue. Do not speak to them. No matter what you hear, no matter what they say, do not engage. They talk? I asked. I thought this was palliative care, end of life. They dream, she whispered, and their dreams are contagious. We reached the 3rd floor. It was a long, narrow corridor lined with dark wood paneling. The floor was covered in a runner rug with a complex, dizzying geometric pattern. There were 12 doors, 6 on each side. I will return at dawn, Matron Holloway said. There is a thermos of coffee in the nurse's station. Do not sleep. If you sleep, you may not wake up as yourself. With that cheerful piece of advice, she turned and descended the stairs. I listened to her footsteps fade, click, 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 until the heavy door at the bottom of the stairwell slammed shut. I was alone. I went to the nurse's station, a small alcove halfway down. The hall. It was dusty. The computer was an ancient CRT monitor that hummed with a high-pitched whine. On the desk was a ledger. I opened it. It was a logbook. The names of the patients were written in elegant script. Room 301, Mr. Blackwood. Room 302, Mrs. Gable. Room 303, the twins. Room 304, unknown. Unknown? How could a patient be unknown? I decided to do my first round. I needed to see what I was dealing with. I walked to room 301. The door was heavy oak, no window. I turned the handle slowly and peered inside. The room was lit only by the moonlight filtering through the heavy velvet drapes. In the center was a hospital bed. Lying in it was a figure. Mr. Blackwood was ancient. His skin was like parchment paper stretched over a bundle of twigs. He was impossibly thin. His mouth was open, a black cavern in his face. He wasn't connected to any machines, no heart monitor, no IV drip. He was perfectly still. I watched his chest. It didn't rise. It didn't fall. I stepped closer. Mr. Blackwood? I whispered, breaking the rule immediately. Nothing. I leaned in to check for breath. The air around him was freezing cold despite the stifling heat of the hallway. Then I saw his eyes. They were open, staring at the ceiling, but they weren't human eyes. They were flat, matte black like a shark's, and they were dry. I backed out of the room and shut the door. My heart was hammering. He looked dead. He looked like he had been dead for weeks. I checked room 302. Mrs. Gable. Same thing. Withered, motionless, no machines, staring at the ceiling with those dead black eyes. I went through every room. 12 rooms, 12 corpses, or things that looked like corpses. None of them breathed. None of them moved. I went back to the nurse's station and sat down. My hands were shaking. I poured a cup of coffee from the thermos. It was lukewarm and tasted bitter like ash. I looked at the time. 10:15 p.m., 8 hours to go. It's just a storage facility, I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize it. They're dead, and the matron is just keeping them here until what? Funerals? At 11 p.m., the sounds started. It began as a scratching noise, like rats in the walls. I tried to ignore it. Old houses have rats. But then the scratching changed. It became rhythmic. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the floorboards, directly beneath my feet. I moved my chair back. The scratching followed me. Then a thud, loud and wet, coming from room 306. I grabbed a heavy flashlight I'd brought from my car. I walked down the hall to room 306. The nameplate said, Captain Miller. I stood outside the door. Silence. Then another thud, like a side of beef being dropped on the floor. I threw the door open and shone the light inside. Captain Miller was in his bed. He hadn't moved. He was still staring at the ceiling with those shark eyes. But the bed had moved. When I checked earlier, the bed was in the center of the room. Now it was pushed up against the far wall under the window. I scanned the floor. There were drag marks in the dust. But they didn't lead to the bed. They led from the bed to the door, and then back again, as if he had gotten up, walked to the door to listen to me, and then scrambled back into bed when I approached. "I know you're awake," I said, my voice trembling. The corpse of Captain Miller didn't blink, but slowly the corners of his mouth twitched, a dry crackling sound like tearing paper. He smiled. It was a wide, impossible smile that revealed gums black with rot. I slammed the door and backed away. I locked it from the outside, using the master key on the ring. I retreated to the nurse's station. I pulled the ledger toward me. I needed to know who these people were. I flipped back through the pages. The dates went back. November 2023, October 2023, September 1994, August 1952, July 1921. I stopped. The handwriting was the same names. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Gable, Captain Miller. They had been checked in decades ago. These people weren't dying. They were persisting. At midnight, the temperature dropped. The radiator pipes groaned and fell silent. The oppressive heat vanished, replaced by a bone-deep chill that made my breath fog in the air, and the shadows detached. I was watching the hallway. The only light came from the small lamp on my desk. It cast long shadows from the door frames across the patterned rug. I watched as the shadow of room 304's doorframe stretched. It grew longer. It bent in the middle, forming a knee, then a torso, then a head. The shadow pulled itself free from the wood and stood up in the middle of the hallway. It was two-dimensional, a silhouette cut from the darkness, but it had presence. It blocked the view of the far end of the hall, then another shadow detached from room 308, and another from 310. They stood in the hallway, silent, faceless, turning their flat heads toward me. I froze. I remembered the matron's rule, do not speak to them. The shadow from room 304 began to glide toward me. It didn't walk. It slid across the floor like an oil slick. I scrambled backward, knocking over the coffee thermos. The brown liquid splashed onto the rug. The shadow paused at the spill. It crouched down. I watched in horror as it dipped a shadowy hand into the coffee. It brought the hand to where a mouth should be. It made a sound, a slurping, sucking sound. Then it spoke. "Bitter," the shadow whispered. The voice didn't come from the shadow itself. It came from the walls, vibrating the wood paneling. "We prefer sweet. We prefer vital." "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the guests," the shadow said. "The shells in the beds. They are just the heavy coats we wear during the day. The day is so bright. It burns. But the night is ours." It stood up and started moving toward me again. I ran. I grabbed the keys and sprinted for the stairwell. I shoved the brass key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Wrong key, the shadow whispered. It was right behind me now. I could feel the cold radiating off it. I fumbled with the ring. I tried the silver key. It didn't fit. The shadow's hand reached out. It touched my shoulder. It didn't feel like a hand. It felt like vacuum. It felt like the space where my shoulder existed was suddenly being deleted. Numbness spread down my arm instantly. I screamed and dropped the keys. "The black key," the shadow hissed. "Go down. The matron is waiting." I kicked the keys away and threw my shoulder against the door. It was solid oak. It didn't budge. The shadows were circling me now. 6 of them. They were featureless, but I could feel their hunger. "Why me?" I yelled. "Why am I here?" "The matron needs a new coat," the shadow of Captain Miller said. "Hers is wearing thin. Look." The shadow pointed to the nurse's station. I looked. Standing there was Matron Halloway. But she wasn't wearing her skin correctly. Her face was sagging, drooping off the bone like melting wax. One eye had slid down to her cheek. Her jaw was hanging loose. Underneath the sliding skin, I saw something dark and shifting, something made of smoke and teeth. "Shift change," the matron's voice gurgled. I looked at the window at the end of the hall. It was a straight drop to the jagged rocks of the valley below. But it was better than this. I ran. I dodged through the circle of shadows. They swiped at me, their touches sending bolts of freezing numbness through my body. My left leg went dead, but I kept hopping. I threw myself at the window. I expected the glass to shatter. It didn't. I bounced off. The glass was soft. It felt like rubber. It bent outward, catching me like a net, and then snapped back, throwing me onto the rug. I looked up at the window. The glass rippled. It wasn't glass. It was a membrane. A clear biological film stretched over the frame. The house wasn't a house. I looked at the walls. The wood paneling was pulsing, breathing. The geometric pattern on the rug was writhing, shifting like snakes. "You are inside," the matron gurgled, shambling toward me. She reached up and grabbed her own hair. She pulled. With a wet, tearing sound, she peeled her face off. Underneath, there was no skull, just a swirling vortex of black shadow. "We are all inside," she said. I crawled backward. My hand hit the keys I had dropped. The black key, the one she said never to use. The basement. If the stairwell door wouldn't open, maybe the supply closet would. No, that was a dead end. I looked at the floor. In the center of the rug, there was a hatch. I hadn't seen it before because the rug covered it, but the rug had pulled back, revealing a handle. It had a black keyhole. The shadows were closing in. The matron was looming over me, the darkness inside her reaching out like tendrils. I jammed the black key into the floor hatch. It turned with a fluid, organic click. I pulled the hatch open. I expected a ladder. I expected stairs. I saw a throat, a fleshy, red, pulsating tunnel going straight down into the dark. The walls of the tunnel were lined with teeth, rows and rows of molars the size of cinder blocks. "The basement," the matron whispered. "The stomach." I looked at the shadows. I looked at the teeth. "Jump," the shadows whispered. "Join the digestion. Become a coat." I didn't jump. I scrambled. I rolled to the side just as the matron lunged. She fell into the hole. She didn't scream. She laughed, a hollow, echoing laugh as she tumbled down into the gullet of the house. The house screamed. The walls shook. The floor buckled. The residents in the rooms began to wail, a high, piercing shriek that shattered the light bulbs. The shadows flickered and vanished. The illusion was breaking. I stood up on my numb leg. The stairwell door had swung open. The lock had shattered. I ran. I tumbled down the stairs, tripping, falling, breaking my nose on the banister. I didn't stop. I ran past the second floor, past the first floor. The foyer was changing. The wallpaper was peeling back to reveal raw muscle. The front door was teeth. I grabbed a heavy iron coat rack from the corner and smashed it into the front window. This glass was real. It shattered. I dove through the jagged hole, cutting my arms and face, and landed in the gravel driveway. I scrambled to my car. It started on the first try. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove down the mountain at 80 miles an hour, risking death on every curve. I didn't stop until I reached the next state. That was a week ago. I'm in a motel now. I keep the lights on. I keep the TV on, but I can't escape it. I looked in the mirror this morning. There is a loose patch of skin on my cheek, just a small spot. But when I touch it, I can't feel it, and underneath, I can feel something moving. I think the matron was right. I think I let the heat out, and now I'm getting cold. I just heard a car pull up outside the motel room. It sounds like an old engine. And now there is a knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Thump, 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 and a voice. "You forgot your paycheck, Mr. Evans." It's the matron's voice. And then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. A black key. I'm going to the window. I'm going to run. But the window, the glass looks soft. It looks like it's breathing. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. I took a night shift in a haunted hotel where no one books room 9. I needed the money. Desperately. After the layoff at the call center, the one where they called it restructuring but really just handed us pink slips and a lukewarm donut on the way out, I'd cycled through temp gigs that barely covered gas, let alone rent. So when old man Hargrove, the owner of the Everly Grand Hotel, offered me the night clerk position over lukewarm coffee at the diner, I didn't ask why the last guy quit after only 3 shifts. I just nodded and said, "When do I start?" The Everly Grand wasn't grand anymore. It was a hulking relic of the 1920s, wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a pawn shop on the edge of downtown. Once, it had hosted jazz-age celebrities and politicians. Now, it catered mostly to truckers passing through and the occasional couple looking for a cheap place to hide a hangover. The lobby still had marble floors and tarnished brass fixtures, but the carpet was worn threadbare in paths worn by decades of weary feet, and the chandeliers flickered with the erratic heartbeat of failing bulbs. Hargrove, gaunt and stooped in a moth-eaten cardigan, gave me the bare minimum tour. "Front desk is yours from midnight to 6, he rasped, his voice like gravel under a boot. "Guests check in before 11. Mostly just 3, 5, and 7 on the second floor get used. Room 12 on the third sometimes. Rest are storage." He paused outside a door on the second floor hallway, his knuckles whitening around the cane he leaned on. His eyes darted toward the door marked with a tarnished brass 9. "Room 9, he said, voice dropping to a whisper, "is not to be entered, not by guests, not by staff, not ever. You see the lock? Keep it locked. If someone asks for it, tell them it's flooded, or under renovation, or full of bees. Anything. Just don't let them in, and don't go in yourself." He wouldn't say why, just shook his head, muttered about old business, and shuffled off, leaving me standing in the dim corridor, with the weight of that single locked door pressing against my back. My first night was quiet, eerily so. The hotel was empty, except for a trucker snoring in room 3. I sat at the scarred wooden desk under the weak glow of a green-shaded lamp, reading a dog-eared paperback and jumping at every creak of the old building settling. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, soft at first, like water dripping, but the sound wasn't coming from the pipes. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Click, click, click. Like high heels on hardwood. I froze, listening. It seemed to come from the hallway outside the front desk, near the staircase leading up to the second floor. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from under the desk, more for comfort than utility, and crept to the archway. The hallway was empty. The carpet muffled sound, but the click, click, click was still there, faint now, drifting from somewhere upstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice too loud in the silence. Nothing answered, just the dripping sound, retreating further away until it vanished entirely. I chalked it up to nerves. Old buildings make noises. Rats, maybe, or wind finding its way through cracks I couldn't see. I went back to my desk, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow in the lobby seemed to shift. Every tick of the grandfather clock behind me felt like a countdown. The second night, things escalated. Around 1 a.m., the fire alarm blared, a short, sharp shriek that cut through the silence like a knife. I scrambled to the panel behind the desk. No smoke, no heat sensors triggered, just the alarm wailing insistently for 30 seconds before cutting off as abruptly as it started. My hands were shaking as I checked the system log. Nothing. Blank. Like it had never happened. Then at 3:17 a.m., the phone on the desk rang. I nearly fell off my stool. No one ever called the front desk at night. Guests used the room phone if they needed anything, and there was no one else in the building. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, my throat dry. "Everly Grand, how can I—" Static hissed down the line. Then a voice, female, young, terrified. "Help me, please. I can't get out. The door, it won't open." The words were choked, punctuated by ragged breathing. "Room 9. I'm in room 9. My blood went cold. "Room 9 is locked," I stammered. "No one's in there. It's not occupied." "It is now," she sobbed. I walked in. I don't know how. It was open, and now it's locked from the outside. Please, the mirrors, they're watching me." The line went dead. I sat frozen, the receiver clutched in my hand, the dial tone buzzing mockingly in my ear. It couldn't be real. It had to be a prank. But the voice, it had been so raw, so genuinely panicked. And the mention of mirrors. Hargrove hadn't said anything about mirrors. I spent the rest of the night staring at the staircase, half expecting to see that girl stumble down, pale and wide-eyed. Nothing happened. At 6 a.m., when Hargrove shuffled in for his morning coffee, I blurted out the story. He didn't look surprised, just weary. "Told you," he said, stirring sugar into his mug with a trembling hand. "Room 9 doesn't take kindly to callers or guests or questions." He wouldn't say more. The third night, I brought my phone. Not for calls. Reception was spotty in the lobby, but to record anything strange, maybe proof, maybe just for my own sanity. The hotel felt heavier that night, the air thick and stale, like it hadn't been breathed in years. Around midnight, the temperature in the lobby dropped suddenly. My breath fogged in front of me. The green lamp flickered, casting long, leaping shadows. Then the piano in the sunken parlor, a grand, dust-covered instrument I hadn't even noticed before, began to play. Not a full song, just a single melancholic note. Held. Then another. Slow, hesitant, like someone learning or remembering. I crept toward the archway, phone held out, recording. The parlor was dark, moonlight streaming through tall, grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The piano bench was empty, but the keys were moving, depressing slowly, one by an invisible hand. I stopped recording. My hands were icy. This wasn't rats. This wasn't the wind. This was something else, something that knew I was watching. I retreated to the desk, locking the parlor door from my side, a flimsy lock, but it made me feel marginally safer. Hours crawled by. Just before 4 a.m., I heard the click, click, click again, closer this time, right outside the front desk archway. I held my breath, peering into the gloom. A figure stood there. She was tall, dressed in a pale, old-fashioned nightgown that might have been white once, but was now stained, yellow with age. Her hair was long and dark, hanging in wet strands around a face that was pale as bone. But it was her eyes that froze me, wide, black, and utterly empty. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me, at something beyond. Water dripped from the hem of a gown, pooling on the worn carpet. Click, click, click. Her bare feet made no sound, but the dripping continued, rhythmic as a metronome. She turned slowly, her head tilting at an unnatural angle, and looked directly at me. A smile touched her lips, a thin, humorless curve. Then she raised a hand, pale and dripping, and pointed toward the staircase, toward the second floor, toward room 9. She vanished, not like she walked away. One moment she was there, the next the space was empty, only the damp spot on the carpet remaining. I didn't sleep for the rest of the shift. I sat rigid at the desk, every muscle clenched, jumping at the slightest sound. When dawn finally bled through the lobby. Windows! I packed up my things and walked straight to Hargrove's office. I told him I quit. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the rent. I'd rather sleep under a bridge. Hargrove just sighed, rubbing his temples. "Figured you would," he said. "They always do." He pulled a folder from a drawer and slid it across the desk. "Before you go, maybe you should know." He tapped the folder. Her name was Elise Werner, stayed at the Everly Grand in 1931, young actress, supposed to be in some big picture, checked into room 9, was found dead 2 days later, drowned in her bathtub, only there was no water in the tub, not a drop. Coroner called it unexplained. He paused, his eyes distant. "They say she was heartbroken, waiting for a lover who never came. That last night she paced the hallway in her nightgown, dripping wet from a bath she'd taken, waiting. And when he didn't show, she just stopped waiting. But her body wouldn't stay dry, and her spirit, it won't stop pacing, won't stop waiting, and if anyone goes into room 9, she thinks they're him, and she won't let them leave." I stared at the folder, at the grainy black and white photo of a smiling, vibrant young woman with bright eyes. Nothing like the hollow thing I'd seen. "Why doesn't anyone book it?" I whispered. "Because no one sane would," Hargrove said simply. "And the ones who do, they never check out." I left the Everly Grand that morning, the weight of the place clinging to me like damp. I found another job, washing dishes in a greasy spoon diner, slept with the lights on for weeks. Thought I was free. Then last night, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Static. Then that voice. Not panic this time. Calm. Certain. "You left," it said, "but you saw me. You know where I am. Room 9 is waiting. The door, it's open now, just for you." The line went dead. I checked my phone. No missed call, no history, just the time, 3:33 a.m. And outside my window, 3 blocks away, I could just make out the silhouette of the Everly Grand against the pre-dawn sky. A single light burned in a second-floor window. Room 9. The phone in my hand vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Just 2 words. Come home. This story ends here. It's time to move on to the next. My childhood home still calls my name long after we moved out. I should have listened to my mother, not the frail, vacant-eyed woman in the Maplewood Gardens memory care unit who barely recognizes me anymore, but the fierce, practical woman she was 20 years ago when we packed our lives into cardboard boxes and U-Haul trailers, fleeing 47 Willow Creek Lane like refugees from a war only we could see. Her hands had been steady on the steering wheel that final afternoon, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to glance back at the 2-story colonial with its peeling white paint and the overgrown lilac bushes clawing at the porch windows. "Don't look back, Ben," she'd said, her voice tight, low. "Don't ever look back. And whatever you do, don't answer if it calls your name." I was 12. I thought she meant the sadness of leaving my room, my treehouse, the backyard where I'd buried a time capsule. I didn't understand she meant the house itself. I didn't understand it had a voice. We moved across the state, new town, new school, new house with bright, empty rooms that echoed. For years, it worked. The nightmares faded. The feeling of being watched from dark corners lessened. I buried Willow Creek Lane deep. A bad dream, best forgotten. My mother never spoke of it again, not even when the dementia began its slow, cruel theft of her memories a decade ago, until last Tuesday. I was visiting her during one of her rare moments of clarity. Her hand, papery and cool, gripped mine with surprising strength. Her eyes, clouded but focused, locked onto mine. "Ben," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of antiseptic and applesauce. "The house. It's hungry again. It remembers you. It's calling." She fumbled under her thin hospital blanket and pressed something cold and metallic into my palm. The key. The old, tarnished brass key to the front door of 47 Willow Creek Lane. "You have to go," she rasped, "before it takes someone else. Like it took. Her eyes rolled back, the moment of lucidity gone as quickly as it came, replaced by vacant confusion. She started humming a nursery rhyme, off-key. I sat there, the cold weight of that key burning in my hand, the words echoing, its calling. I drove through the night. The familiar highway exits blurred past, each mile marker tightening the knot in my stomach. Dawn was just bleeding gray into the sky when I turned onto Willow Creek Road. The neighborhood looked smaller, shabbier. Lawns were patchy, driveways cracked, and there it was, 47 Willow Creek Lane. The lilac bushes were gone, replaced by weeds growing knee-high around the foundation. The white paint was almost entirely gone now, revealing gray, weathered wood beneath. The windows were dark, grimy eyes. The porch sagged dangerously on one side. It looked abandoned, forgotten, exactly as it should be. No one had lived there since us. The bank owned it now, a decaying monument to bad memories. Or so I thought. The key turned with a gritty resistance that sent shivers down my spine. The front door opened with the same long, mournful creak it always had. The smell hit me first. Not dust, not mildew. Underneath the decay was that old familiar scent, lemon oil polish, my mother's vanilla candles, and the faint, sweet, tangy aroma of the apple tree that used to grow by the back fence. It was the smell of home. And layered beneath it, almost imperceptible at first, was the other smell, the one I'd only ever noticed in the dead of night. Damp earth, wet stone, and something else, like old pennies left in the rain. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. The kind that presses on your eardrums. I stepped inside, my boots loud on the bare floorboards where the carpet had been ripped up. The hallway stretched before me, darker than it should have been, even with the dawn light filtering through the grimy front window. The staircase rose to the second floor, the banister coated in dust. My old room was at the top to the left, but it was the basement door tucked under the stairs that drew my gaze. It stood slightly ajar, just like it always did when I was a kid. My mother had a rule: never go into the basement alone, never after dark. I never questioned it, not after the night I was 8, when I'd gone down to fetch the laundry basket and heard something, not a sound, a feeling, a cold, wet pressure against my ankle, like unseen hands trying to pull me down the steps. I'd scrambled back up, slamming the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. My mother found me hyperventilating on the kitchen floor. She never explained what I'd felt. She just reinforced the rule, her face pale. I forced myself to look away from the basement door. I walked through the empty living room. My father's old armchair was gone, leaving a pale rectangle on the floorboards. The fireplace was cold, filled with debris. I went into the kitchen. The yellow tiles were cracked. The refrigerator stood open, empty and dark. And on the counter, right where my mother used to keep the fruit bowl, sat a single, perfect, impossibly ripe red apple. It glistened under the weak light from the window. It shouldn't have been there. No one had been here in years. I touched it. Cold. Unnaturally cold. I picked it up. The stem broke off easily, and a thin trickle of dark, viscous liquid, like old blood, oozed from the break. I dropped it, wiping my hand frantically on my jeans. The smell of decay intensified, thickening the air. I climbed the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. My old bedroom door was closed. I pushed it open. The wallpaper, dinosaurs chasing rockets across a blue sky, was peeling at the seams, faded almost to gray. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It looked small, smaller than I remembered, safe. I sat on the bare mattress frame, the springs groaning. For a moment, just a moment, the fear receded. It was just an old, empty house. My mother's dementia, the key, the apple, stress, grief. That's all it was. Then I heard it, faint at first, a whisper so soft it could have been the wind in the eaves. But there was no wind. The air was utterly still. Ben. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was layered, childlike, high-pitched, but underneath it, A wet, guttural rasp, like stones grinding together underwater. It came from the hallway, from the direction of the stairs. "Ben, come play." It was my voice, my 8-year-old voice, but twisted wrong. I stood up so fast I knocked over the empty lamp on the nightstand. The crash echoed like a gunshot. The whispering stopped. Silence crashed back, heavier than before. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. Nothing, just the frantic hammering of my own heart. It's not real. It's the house settling. It's your mind, your mother's words. But the cold certainty settled in my gut. It was real, and it knew I was here. I crept to the bedroom door, peering out into the hallway. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, undisturbed. No footprints. I moved slowly towards the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. The basement door downstairs was now wide open. A deeper darkness spilled out from the stairwell below, a darkness that seemed to swallow the weak light from the hallway window. And from that darkness came a sound, a slow, rhythmic drip, 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 like water falling into a puddle. But the house had been dry. The roof looked intact from outside. "Ben," the whisper came again, closer this time, from the foot of the stairs. My childhood voice, thick with tears now. "I'm cold, so cold. Come hold my hand." Every instinct screamed to run. Out the front door, down the street, never look back. But another thought, colder and more insistent, rooted me to the spot. What if it has her, my mother's words, before it takes someone else? Was it calling to me, or through someone else? Someone it had already taken? The image of my mother's vacant eyes filled my mind. Was this why she forgot? Because part of her was still here, trapped in the dark? I took a step down. The old wood groaned under my weight. The dripping sound stopped. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, oppressive, waiting. I took another step, and another. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of damp earth and pennies thickening until I could taste it. At the bottom of the stairs, the darkness was almost complete. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, my fingers numb. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue-white circle of light on the basement floor. The beam illuminated cracked concrete, old paint cans, and stacks of mildewed cardboard boxes. But it also caught the edge of something else. Small, worn sneakers, child-sized, bright blue, covered in mud, my sneakers. From when I was 10, they shouldn't be here. We'd taken everything. And beside them, leading away from the stairs towards the far corner where the furnace hulked like a sleeping beast, were wet footprints. Small footprints, fresh, glistening in the phone light. "Ben," the whisper came from the corner near the furnace. My voice again, but strained, choked. "You came back. I knew you would. It let me wait for you." I followed the footprints with the light. They stopped abruptly at the base of the furnace. The beam trembled in my hand as I swept it upwards. Taped haphazardly to the metal side of the furnace, half hidden by cobwebs, was a drawing. Crayon on construction paper. I remembered making it. I was 7. It showed our house, with a smiling sun above it. But in the window of the basement, drawn in thick, angry black crayon, was a face. A face with too many teeth and hollow, empty eyes. And scrawled at the bottom in my messy child's handwriting, "It lives here. It likes my voice." The whisper came again, not from the corner, but from right behind me, close enough that I felt the cold, damp breath on the back of my neck. My own voice, but layered with that wet, grinding rasp. "It's so dark down here, Ben, but it sings to me. It sings with my voice. Now it wants yours." I spun around, phone light swinging wildly. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the bottom of the stairs. Standing there, barely visible in the gloom, was a shape, small, wearing the blue sneakers. But the body was wrong, hunched, the head tilted at an unnatural angle, and a face. It wasn't a face. It was a shifting, wet darkness, but within it, 2 points of faint, sickly green light glowed where eyes should be. It reached out a hand, small, pale, but the fingers were too long, the nails blackened and sharp. It made the same wet, gurgling sigh my mother had made in the hospital when the lucidity slipped away. "Come closer," it whispered with my stolen voice. "It's time to sing." I stumbled backwards, crashing into the furnace. The phone clattered from my hand, skittering across the concrete, the light beam spinning crazily, throwing monstrous, leaping shadows on the walls. In the strobing light, I saw more drawings taped to the furnace, to the support beams. Dozens of them. Crayon drawings of children, different children, some in old-fashioned clothes, all with the same hollow eyes drawn in black, all with the same words scrawled beneath. "It likes my voice." The spinning light settled, pointing towards the far wall, and there, half hidden behind a stack of rotten boxes, I saw the source of the dripping sound, a dark stain spread across the concrete floor, seeping from a crack in the foundation wall. But it wasn't water. It was thick, dark red, and it was moving, not flowing. Crawling. Tendrils of it snaked across the floor towards my dropped phone, towards my boots. Where it touched, the concrete, the stone seemed to soften, to breathe. The small figure took another step forward. The green eyes flared brighter. The whisper became a chorus, layered with the voices of other children, other stolen names. "Stay, play, sing, feed us." The wet footprints on the floor began to glow with that same sickly green light. The dripping stain pulsed. The house itself seemed to inhale, the air pressure dropping, making my ears pop. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the phone's beam. And beneath the child voices, I heard it. The true voice of the house. Not a whisper. A deep, subterranean thrumming, vibrating up through the concrete into my bones. A sound of immense, ancient hunger. It wasn't haunted. It was alive. And it had been waiting. For me. For my voice. For the echo of the child who had lived here, the child whose fear it had tasted all those years ago and found delicious. The small figure lunged, not fast, but with terrifying inevitability. I kicked out blindly, my boot connecting with something cold and yielding. It let out a shriek, a wet, tearing sound that wasn't human, wasn't childlike, but a raw, animal thing of rage and hunger. I scrambled for the stairs, slipping onto damp concrete, my hands scrabbling for purchase on the rough wood of the stair treads. I could feel the cold radiating from the thing behind me, smell the rot on its breath, hear the chorus of stolen voices rising in a fever pitch. "Don't leave us! Sing for us! Feed us!" I burst through the basement door at the top of the stairs, slamming it shut behind me. I fumbled for the deadbolt, rusted, stiff. I threw my weight against it. Clunk, locked. Just as something heavy thudded against the other side, the wood groaned, the door handle rattled violently, then stopped. Silence. But the cold seeped through the wood, and the whispering started again, not through the door this time, but inside my head. My own childhood voice, clear and bright, singing the lullaby my mother used to sing. Hush now, baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. But the words twisted in my mind. Hush now, Ben, don't run away. The house is hungry. Come and stay. I leaned against the door, gasping, sweat freezing on my skin. The hallway was dark. The front door was only 20 feet away, an impossible distance. The lights flickered overhead, bare bulbs hanging from chains, then died completely, plunging the house into near darkness. Only the faint gray light from the front window remained, and in that gloom I saw them, shapes detaching themselves from the deeper shadows of the living room doorway. Small shapes, 3 of them, wearing clothes from different eras, a boy in knickers and a newsboy cap, a girl in a pinafore dress, a teenager in 80s jeans. Their faces were indistinct smudges of shadow, but their eyes glowed that same sickly green. They didn't walk. They slid across the floorboards, silent, except for the faint, wet sound of their passage. They fanned out, blocking the path to the front door. Their whispers joined the chorus in my head, a cacophony of stolen childhoods. Stay, sing, belong. The basement door behind me creaked open a fraction of an inch. The cold intensified. The dripping sound started again, louder now, echoing up the stairwell. Drip, drip, drip. It wasn't just blood. It was the sound of the house breathing, waiting for its next meal, its next voice. I backed away from the basement door, towards the stairs. The small figures advanced, their green eyes fixed on me. The lullaby in my head swelled, drowning out my own thoughts. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. But the house's voice wove through it. And if that boy won't sing for me, the basement floor will set him free. I reached the bottom of the stairs. No escape that way. The front door was blocked. The kitchen led to the back door, maybe. I darted sideways towards the kitchen archway. The figures moved faster than I expected, gliding to intercept me. One reached out. Its hand passed through the weak light from the window, and for a second I saw it wasn't flesh. It was made of that same dark, crawling stain from the basement, shot through with veins of that eerie green light. It brushed my arm. The cold wasn't just on my skin. It shot into my bones, into my chest. My heart stuttered. My breath fogged thickly in the air, and the whispering, it wasn't just in my head anymore. It was in my throat. My jaw muscles tightened. My lips parted. Against my will, my voice, my real voice, but thin and strained, began to form the words of the lullaby. Hush. Now. Baby. Panic surged. I clamped my hand over my mouth, biting down on my palm until I tasted blood. The pain broke the compulsion. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that tore through the house's silence. The effect was instantaneous. The green-eyed figures flinched back as if burned. The whispering in my head faltered. The basement door slammed shut with a thunderous bang. The dripping stopped. For 3 heartbeats, there was only my ragged breathing and the frantic pounding in my ears. Then, from the basement, a new sound began. Not dripping, not whispering, a slow, deliberate dragging, heavy, wet, like something large being pulled across concrete, and beneath it, that deep, subterranean thrumming grew louder, angrier. The floor vibrated, dust sifted from the ceiling. The house wasn't playing anymore. It was coming for me. I didn't think. I ran, not toward the blocked front door, but through the kitchen. The back door was warped, swollen shut. I threw my shoulder against it, once, twice. Wood splintered around the lock. I stumbled out into the overgrown backyard, falling onto my hands and knees in the tall, wet grass. I scrambled up, not daring to look back, and ran for the street. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a lamppost, gasping, my clothes soaked with dew and sweat, my arm burning where the shadow hand had touched me. I called the realtor from a gas station payphone, told them the house was unstable, dangerous. They sent someone. The front door was locked tight. The basement door was sealed shut with fresh, heavy-duty padlocks that hadn't been there the day before. No sign of forced entry, no sign of me. The realtor thought I was hysterical, stressed, grieving my mother. They listed the house anyway, a bargain fixer-upper. My mother died last week. Peacefully, they said, in her sleep. When I went to collect her few belongings from Maplewood Gardens, the nurse handed me a small box. "She kept asking for this," she said gently. Inside was a child's drawing, my drawing, the one of the house with the face in the basement window, but someone had added to it, in shaky adult handwriting that I recognized as my mother's, written around the edges of the paper like a desperate prayer. "It calls in their voices. It hungers for the sound of home. Don't answer. Don't look back. Break the key." And tucked into the corner of the frame was the brass key to 47 Willow Creek Lane. Cold, heavy. I didn't break it. I couldn't. It feels like the only thing tethering me to her, to what she tried to protect me from. I live in a 3rd-floor apartment now. Concrete walls, no basement. I keep the lights on all night. But sometimes, in the deepest part of the silence, when the city outside finally quiets down, I hear it, faint at first, a whisper on the edge of sleep. My mother's voice, young and strong again. "Ben, sweetheart, time for bed." Then it shifts, becomes my own childhood voice, small and scared. "Mommy, there's something under my bed. It's singing." And underneath both, that wet, grinding rasp, the sound of stones in deep water, humming a lullaby I know by heart. The key sits on my nightstand, cold, waiting, and the worst part isn't the fear. It's the terrible, seductive pull in that whisper. The part of me that remembers the warmth of that old kitchen, the safety of my room before the shadows learned my name. The part that wonders, in the fragile hours before dawn, if the singing might not be so bad, if the hunger might finally be quieted, if I just answered back. The dripping has started again, not from the ceiling, from the key. Drip, drip, drip. Midnight is coming, and the house remembers the way home. It always remembers. That's where this tale ends. Now, another waits just beyond the shadows. My grandfather's chair rocks on its own and calls my name. The keys were cold in my palm when a lawyer handed them over. "Maplewood Farm," he'd said, avoiding my eyes. "Your grandfather's stipulation was clear. Only you could inherit. He said you'd understand why." I hadn't understood, not then. I'd just been grateful. After the medical bills swallowed my savings following Mom's cancer, after the eviction notice flooded under my apartment door like a dead leaf, this decaying farmhouse on the edge of the Vermont woods was salvation, or so I thought. The lawyer's parting words echoed as I drove the winding mountain road. Mind the chair in the parlor. He was never without it. And Lily, keep the curtains drawn after dark. Maplewood smelled of damp earth and wood smoke the moment I pushed open the sagging porch door. Dust hung thick in the slanted afternoon light, motes dancing above furniture shrouded in yellowed sheets. The air was unnaturally still, heavy, as if the house had been holding its breath for years. Grandpa Silas had lived alone here since Grandma May died in '78. I remembered childhood summers, the smell of his pipe tobacco, the rough warmth of his flannel shirt against my cheek as he rocked me to sleep in that very chair. Now, the parlor was a museum of stillness, except for the chair. It sat alone in the corner, facing the cold brick fireplace. An old shaker rocker, its oak arms polished smooth by decades of his hands, the cane seat frayed but intact. It looked ordinary, innocent. I ran my fingers along its arm, expecting the familiar scent of lemon oil and cherry tobacco. Instead, a wave of cold washed over me, sharp as a winter creek. I pulled my hand back. The chair hadn't moved, but the silence around it felt watchful. That first night, the house settled like all old places do. Floorboards groaning, wind sighing in the eaves. I slept on a lumpy sofa in the parlor, too exhausted to unpack. Just after 10 a.m., I woke to a soft, rhythmic creak, creak, creak. My eyes snapped open. Moonlight streamed through the undrawn curtains, painting the room in shades of bone. The rocker was moving, rocking slowly, steadily, as if an invisible weight shifted within it, empty, perfectly empty. My breath fogged in the sudden chill that clung to the chair like a shroud. I lay frozen until dawn, listening to that gentle, impossible motion, a lullaby for the dead. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a draft, or squirrels in the walls. I busied myself airing out rooms, washing grimy windows, hauling moth-eaten curtains to the burn pile. But the parlor door kept swinging shut on its own, and every time I passed the rocker, that cold spot lingered around it, the air thick with the faint, ghostly scent of cherry tobacco. That night, I drew the curtains tight, locked the parlor door, pushed a heavy oak chest against it. I slept in the kitchen nook, back against the cast-iron stove. At 3:07 a.m., the rocking began again, louder, insistent. Creak shush! Creak shush! It vibrated through the floorboards, up the stove's legs, into my bones, and beneath it, a sound that made my blood freeze, a whisper so faint it might have been the wind. Lily? Grandpa's voice, exactly as I remembered it, raspy from pipe smoke, warm as sun-baked stone, but layered beneath it something else, a dry, rattling undertone like stones shifting in a deep well. Lily, come sit. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The whisper came again, closer now, seeming to seep under the kitchen door. Cold out here alone. The rocking stopped abruptly. Silence. Then 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the parlor door. Tap, tap, tap. Like knuckles on wood. The chest blocking the door scraped sideways an inch on the hardwood floor, as if shoved by an invisible hand. I buried my face in my knees until the first gray light bled through the kitchen window. I called the lawyer. He refused to discuss the chair. Some things Silas carried to his grave, he muttered, static crackling on the line. He loved you fiercely, child. That's all that matters. When I pressed him, his voice dropped to a whisper. After May died, he changed, stopped going to town, sat in that chair day and night, staring at the basement door, said the house needed guarding, said it was getting stronger. The line went dead. The rocking became my nightly ritual, always at 3:07 a.m., always that whisper. Lily? Sometimes it was gentle, sometimes desperate. Once, sharp with warning, don't open the cellar. I found the basement door, a heavy plank thing at the back of the mudroom, locked with a rusted padlock Grandpa had never used before. I didn't touch it. I kept the parlor curtains drawn. I slept with the lights on. But exhaustion wore me down. Grief for Mom, for the life I'd lost, made the chair's whisper feel less like threat and more like an anchor. One rain-lashed night, after crying myself raw over unpaid bills, I stood before the parlor door. The rocking had started early. Creak, shoosh, creak, shoosh. The whisper was soft, coaxing. Come warm me, little sparrow. I'm so cold. I turned the key, pushed the door open. The rocker moved slowly in the moonlight, empty. The cold radiating from it made my teeth chatter. The scent of cherry tobacco was overwhelming. I took a shaky step forward. That's my girl. Grandpa's voice sighed, the rattling undertone almost buried. Just like your mother, brave heart. Tears blurred my vision. I reached out, my fingers trembling inches from the worn oak arm. The temperature plummeted. My breath plumed thickly. The rocking stopped dead. The whisper turned guttural, the voice splitting into two. One Grandpa's, warm and broken, the other a dry, scraping hiss that seemed to come from the chair's very wood. Mine now. She's mine. Let her sit. The chair jerked, violently forward, then back, as if wrestling itself. Frost bloomed across the floorboards toward my bare feet. I stumbled back, slamming the parlor door. The chest scraped against the floor again, but I threw my weight against it, sobbing. From the other side, the chair rocked furiously. Creak, shush, creak, shush, creak, shush. And the whispers tangled. Lily, run! Stay! Warm me! Feed me! I fled to the town library the next morning, hunched over microfiche in the hushed, dusty archives. I found it, a brittle newspaper clipping from October 12, 1952. Local woman disappears near Maplewood Farm. May Callahan, Grandma May, vanished while gathering herbs near the property line. No body ever found. The article mentioned rumors, strange lights in the farmhouse windows at night, Grandpa Silas's sudden refusal to let anyone into the basement. Then a smaller piece dated March 3rd, 1953. Farmer Silas Thorne commits to state hospital after breakdown. It cited delusions and obsession with the cellar. He was released 6 months later, a quiet man who never spoke of what he'd seen or what he'd trapped. That night, I didn't lock the parlor door. I sat in the kitchen, a cast-iron skillet gripped in my hands, waiting for 3:07. The rocking started on time, so did the whisper, Lily. But this time, Grandpa's voice fought through the hiss. Listen, child, not me. The chair, it holds the door. The rattling voice snarled, Lies! She belongs here. The rocker slammed against the wall with a crack that shook the plaster. The cellar door weakens, needs a warm soul to hold it shut. May was too bright, burned it. I used the cold. My grief froze the lock. Grandpa's voice strained, fading. But the cold is killing me too. Need warmth, your warmth. Sit, Lily, save us all. Yes, the other voice shrieked. Sit. I understood then. The chair wasn't haunted. It was a key. A lock. Grandpa hadn't gone mad after Grandma disappeared. He'd contained something that took her. Something that fed on warmth, on life, that slithered up from the dark, wet places beneath the house. His grief had been the ice that sealed the door. But ice melts. His heart had stopped 2 weeks ago. The lock was failing. The thing in the cellar was starving. And it wanted me. It was using Grandpa's voice, his love, as bait. The parlor door burst open. The rocker shot across the floor, stopping inches from the kitchen archway. It rocked violently, empty, radiating a cold so deep the air crackled with frost. The whisper wasn't coaxing now. It was a command, layered with the wet sound of roots tearing through earth. Sit, or I take the neighbor's child, the one who brings you eggs. Mrs. Henderson's little boy, Ben. He'd waved at me just yesterday, offering a basket of brown eggs. I dropped the skillet. My legs carried me forward, not from fear, but fury. I stopped before the rocking chair. The cold bit through my sweater, stealing my breath. The voice hissed, "Good girl." I didn't sit. I knelt, pressed my palm flat against the icy floorboards beside the chair. "Grandpa," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I know what you did. I know what you carried, but you don't have to hold it alone anymore." I poured every memory I had into my voice. The smell of his pipe on summer nights, the way he'd hum off-key while mending fences, how he'd held my hand at Mom's funeral when I was 16 and felt the world end. "You loved us, both of us. Let me help you end this." The rocking stopped. Dead silence. The cold lessened, just a fraction. Grandpa's voice, clear and strong, filled the space. The cellar door hinges on sorrow, but the lock is love, not cold, warmth, real warmth. The chair trembled. I used grief, a poor lock. You have love still, for your mother, for life. Use it. "No!" The other voice roared, a sound like trees snapping in a storm. The rocker shot backward, then lunged toward me. Frost spread like black veins across the floor. The basement padlock rattled violently in the mudroom. I didn't flinch. I closed my eyes and thought not of fear, but of Mom's laugh, of Ben's freckled grin offering eggs, of Grandpa's rough hand tucking the quilt around my shoulders. I wrapped those memories around the cold spot, a shield of warmth. "This ends now," I said aloud. "For May, for you, for Ben." I opened my eyes and looked directly at the empty chair. "I release you, Grandpa Silas Thorne. Your watch is over." A sigh filled the room, not the dry rattle, but a deep human breath of relief. The frost receded like a tide. The scent of cherry tobacco bloomed warm and sweet, then faded. The chair gave one last gentle creak, shush, and stilled. Truly still. I walked to the mudroom. The rusted padlock on the cellar door hung open as if untouched for decades. I didn't go down. I wouldn't need to. The chair never rocks again. But sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, when the wind howls like a lost thing through the pines, I sit beside it in the parlor. The curtains stay open now, moonlight spilling across the floor. I rest my hand on its arm. It's always warm. And if I listen very closely beneath the wind, I hear it. Not a whisper, but a sound I haven't heard since I was a child falling asleep on Grandpa's lap. The soft, contented hum of an old man's tune. No words, just peace. I leave a mug of hot cider on the hearthstone each night. It's always cold by morning. And the chair is never quite empty. Not really. It holds the silence like a cup. And in that silence I finally understand why he left this place to me. Not because I was the only one who'd come, but because I was the only one who'd stay. The warmth doesn't just seal the door. It keeps him here, with me. Last week, Ben brought more eggs. He paused in the doorway, staring at the rocker. "Your chair moved when I knocked," he said, eyes wide. just a little wiggle, like it was happy to see you. I smiled, ruffling his hair. It knows good company when it sees it, Ben. After he left, I sat in the shaker rocker for the first time. The wood was warm under my palms, solid, safe, no whispers, no cold, just the quiet creak of honest wood beneath my weight and the distant sigh of the wind in the maples. I closed my eyes. For the first time since Mom died, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home, Grandpa's home, and mine. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. My phone records conversations with someone who isn't alive. The rent was the first red flag, whispering, "Too good to be true." $300 a month for a whole floor in a Victorian-era house on the outskirts of town? The online listing showed peeling paint and a sagging porch, but the price was impossible to ignore after my last roommate skipped out, taking half the deposit and my trust. I'd been couch surfing for weeks, swallowing my pride in instant noodles. So when Mrs. Gable, the landlady, met me with a jangling key ring and eyes that wouldn't quite hold mine, I signed a lease on the cracked Formica counter of her cramped kitchen. She handed me the keys, heavy old brass, and mumbled something about the house having character and settling noises. Her knuckles were white on the edge of the counter. "Top floor's yours. Back staircase. Mind a step on the landing, it's loose. Utilities are included, but keep the lights on after dark. Saves trouble." She wouldn't elaborate, just shooed me out with a trembling hand, already turning toward her silent TV. The house smelled like time and neglect the moment I pushed open the heavy front door. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light, filtering through grimy stained glass. The air was thick, cold, despite the August heat outside, carrying the scent of mildew, old wood, and something else, faintly sweet like forgotten flowers left to rot in a vase. The back staircase was narrow, its banister sticky under my fingers. The third step groaned like a dying thing under my foot. The landing was dim, the single bare bulb overhead flickering erratically, casting jumping shadows. My room was at the end of a short hallway. The door opened onto a large space, high ceilings, a bay window overlooking the tangled, overgrown backyard, and a fireplace choked with decades of soot. The previous tenant had left nothing but a stained mattress on a rusted frame and a cracked porcelain sink in the corner. It was perfect, or it would be after I hauled my few boxes up. The price drowned out the unease tightening in my chest. The first night, the house sang, not with wind whistling through cracks, though there was plenty of that. This was different. The groans from the staircase were deeper, more resonant, like the bones of the house shifting. Floorboards creaked in the empty hallway outside my door, slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped just short of my threshold. I told myself it was the old plumbing cooling down, the wood contracting. I buried myself under a thin blanket, the unfamiliar darkness pressing in, the silence between the sounds feeling heavier than the noise itself. I woke once, sweating despite the chill, convinced I'd heard my name whispered, a breathy sigh that seemed to come from the corner near the fireplace. Just the wind in the chimney, I reasoned, turning on my phone flashlight to banish the shadows. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating only dust and peeling wallpaper. Then the phone started acting up. It was my lifeline, my only expensive possession, a sleek, modern smartphone. The battery began draining inexplicably fast, even on standby. I'd charge it overnight, fully, and wake to find it at 15%. Apps would freeze mid-scroll. Sometimes, when I'd pick it up, the screen would flare with static for a split second before clearing. Annoying, but chalked up to the house's terrible Wi-Fi and maybe old wiring interfering. I bought a cheap signal booster, plugged it into the only working outlet near the window. It helped the connection, but the battery drain worsened. And then came the recordings. It started subtly. I'd be scrolling through photos, and a voice memo icon would appear on my screen that I hadn't created. Just a few seconds long, filled with static. I deleted them, assuming a glitch. Then one rainy Tuesday I heard it. I was making coffee at the tiny stove I'd set up near the sink, the sound of rain drumming on the roof, loud in the quiet house. My phone, sitting on the mattress, suddenly emitted a burst of sound, not a notification, but a playback. I snatched it up. A voice memo, recorded at 3:17 a.m. that morning. My own sleepy, confused voice. "What? Who's there? Stop it!" And underneath my voice, barely audible beneath a layer of distortion like radio interference, another voice, soft, whispery, almost melodic, but utterly devoid of warmth. It said, clear as ice cracking, "I'm here." My blood turned to slush. I hadn't recorded that. I hadn't said that. I played it again and again. My own voice was unmistakable, thick with sleep and fear. The other voice, it wasn't Mrs. Gable. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a voice that didn't belong to this world. I checked the recording settings. Voice activation was off. The microphone permissions for the recording app were restricted. It made no sense. Paranoia, I told myself. Stress. Sleep deprivation. I deleted the file, my fingers clumsy with cold. That night, I slept with the phone face down, battery dead, on the floor across the room. It didn't matter. The next morning, another recording, time-stamped 2:48 a.m. My voice again, sharper this time, laced with a fear I didn't remember feeling. "Leave me alone. I don't know you." And the other voice, closer now, the distortion lessening slightly, revealing a tone that was almost curious. "You know me. You called. You always call when you're sad." The words slithered into my ear. I hadn't called anyone. I barely had anyone to call since moving here. My mother had passed 2 years ago, and the grief had driven a wedge between me and my few remaining friends. The mention of sadness felt like a violation. I threw the phone on the mattress, backing away as if it were radioactive. What was happening? Was the house bugged? Was Mrs. Gable spying? But why would she record me talking in my sleep? And that voice. I started noticing other things, small things that eroded my rationalizations. My favorite mug, the chipped blue one, would be found in the sink in the morning, though I always left it on the small table by the window. The temperature in the room would plummet suddenly, a localized cold spot near the fireplace that made my breath fog. Once, I woke to find the blanket pulled halfway off the mattress, as if tugged gently. The worst was the feeling of being watched, not from outside the window, but from the dark corners of the room itself, especially near the boarded-up fireplace. A heavy, patient attention that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I tried to research the house. Mrs. Gable clammed up tighter than a drum when I mentioned strange noises or cold spots. "Old houses settle," she'd repeat, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes darting away. The local library archives held little. built in 1898 by a man named Silas Thorne, a reclusive watchmaker. He lived alone after his wife died in childbirth. Their infant son, Arthur, lived only 3 days. Silas reportedly became increasingly eccentric, rarely leaving the house until he was found dead in his workshop on the 3rd floor, my floor, in 1923. Cause of death unknown. The entry was brief, clinical. No mention of hauntings, just a sad, quiet end to a lonely man. But the dates stuck with me. Silas lost his wife and child. I'd lost my mother. Was that the thread this thing was pulling on? The recordings became more frequent, more invasive, always at night, always when I was asleep or drifting off. They weren't just snippets anymore. Full conversations my sleeping self was having with something. Recording, 1:55 a.m. Me, muffled, groggy. Mom, is that you? It's so cold. Other voice. Softer, smoother now, almost maternal, but wrong. Too many layers like voices stacked on top of each other. I'm not your mother, but I remember the cold, the deep cold after the light went out. You feel it too, don't you? The empty space. Me, voice trembling. Arthur, your name was Arthur? Other voice, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. Silas called me that, before the silence, before the dark took the warmth. You have warmth, share it. I played that one a dozen times, nausea rising in my throat. How did it know about Arthur? How did it know about my mother? About the empty space her death left? This wasn't just a recording glitch. This was communication. This was an intelligence using my own voice, my own deepest vulnerabilities as a conduit. I tried screaming into the phone during the day, demanding it show itself. Leave me alone. Nothing. The recordings only happened at night, when my guard was down, when the house itself seemed to hold its breath. I started sleeping with earplugs. Useless. The next recording came through anyway, time-stamped 4:03 a.m. Me, voice thick with tears I didn't remember shedding. It hurts. It always hurts. Why doesn't it stop? Other voice, closer than ever, the distortion almost gone, revealing a young man's voice, but hollow, echoing from a great distance. The hurt is the thread. The thread binds us. Silas cut his thread. He left me alone in the cold. Don't cut your thread. Stay warm for me. Let me in. Me, whispering broken. I'm scared. Other voice, a sigh like wind through bare branches. So was I, before the quiet. That was the breaking point. I couldn't stay there another night. I packed frantically at dawn, shoving clothes and toiletries into my backpack, the meager boxes forgotten. I'd sleep in my car, find a motel, anything. As I grabbed my keys, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. A notification, a new voice memo. Recorded 5 minutes ago. My hand shook as I tapped play. No static this time. Crystal clear. Me, my voice, but calm, eerily calm, a voice I didn't recognize as my own. You can't leave. The thread is tied. You called. Remember? When you cried for your mother in the dark that first night? You called into the silence. I heard. I've been waiting so long for someone to call. Silas stopped calling. He went quiet. But you're loud with your sadness. It warms me. Stay. Let me share your warmth. Let me be your Arthur. Your Silas is gone. I can be your family now. The voice wasn't mimicking me perfectly. It was inhabiting me, using my vocal cords, my breath, to speak its own terrible desire. I dropped the phone as if burned. It clattered on the bare floorboards, the screen still glowing, the playback bar still moving. I didn't wait to hear the end. I bolted down the back staircase, the loose step screaming under my weight, out the creaking front door into the gray morning light. I didn't look back. I drove to a 24-hour diner 10 miles away, ordered coffee I couldn't taste, and tried to call Mrs. Gable. Her number went straight to voicemail. I called a friend, my words tumbling out in a desperate rush. They sounded skeptical, concerned for my mental state. Old house, stress, grief. Maybe it's time to see someone. They didn't understand. They hadn't heard the voice. They hadn't felt the cold spot that clung to the back of my neck even now in the brightly lit diner. I couldn't go back. Not ever. I forfeited my deposit, my half-packed boxes of clothes, and the stained mattress. I found a cramped, overpriced studio apartment across town, tripled the rent, but it had solid walls and neighbors whose voices I could hear through the thin walls, living, breathing people. I bought a cheap burner phone for calls and texts. My old smartphone, the one that recorded the conversations, I wrapped in layers of aluminum foil and stuffed deep into the bottom of my backpack, buried under dirty socks like contaminated waste. I hadn't powered it on in 3 days. The silence was bliss. The fear began to recede, replaced by exhaustion and the grim reality of my depleted savings. Maybe, just maybe, it was over. Maybe the entity, Arthur or Silas or whatever lingered in that decaying wood and plaster, was tied to the place. I'd escaped the haunted ground. Last night, the first truly quiet night in the new apartment, I finally slept deeply. No footsteps, no whispers, no unnatural cold. I woke feeling almost human. Sunlight streamed through the window. I stretched, the familiar ache of my old mattress replaced by the firmness of a new futon. Peace. I reached for my backpack, needing my wallet. My fingers brushed the foil-wrapped lump at the bottom. The foil was gone. My old smartphone lay on top of my clothes, screen dark. My breath hitched. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't unwrapped it. Slowly, dreading what I'd see, I picked it up. The battery icon showed full charge. The wallpaper was still my old photo of my mother smiling on a beach I'd never visited with her. My thumb hovered over the power button. "Don't!" screamed every instinct. "It's just a phone, a broken phone. It can't hurt you here." But the cold spot bloomed on the back of my neck again, a familiar, intimate chill. I pressed the button. The screen lit up instantly. No passcode prompt. It went straight to the voice memo app. A new recording. Time-stamped 3:33 a.m. last night. Here, in this safe new apartment. My finger tapped the play button before I could stop myself. Silence for 3 seconds. Then my own voice, clear and calm, speaking words I had no memory of forming in the deepest part of my sleep. "The thread is strong. It stretches. It doesn't break. I found you. The new place is bright, but it's still cold inside you. Don't be afraid of the quiet. Soon you won't be alone anymore. I'm bringing the warmth back. I'm coming to get you." The recording ended. The screen stayed lit. The photo of my mother's smiling face staring back at me. The apartment was silent. No neighbors talking. No traffic hum. Just the deafening thud of my own heart and the suffocating certainty that the cold spot on my neck wasn't just a spot anymore. It was a presence, patient, familiar. And it wasn't waiting outside my door this time. It was already here. It had always been here, riding in my backpack, waiting for me to sleep, waiting for me to be lonely, waiting to use my own voice to tell me it was coming home. The phone screen glowed in the sunlit room, a tiny, impossible window into a darkness that had followed me. I don't know how to stop it. I don't even know if it is one thing or two. Silas and Arthur, fused by decades of sorrow and silence, drawn to the echo of my own grief like moths to a dying flame. All I know is the recordings will keep coming, and one night, when the thread pulls tight enough, when the cold finally reaches my bones, I'll hear my own voice on the phone, speaking words I didn't choose, welcoming it in. The phone is still in my hand. It's starting to vibrate. Not a call, not a text, just a low, insistent thrum against my palm, like a heartbeat that isn't mine. The screen flickers. The playback bar is moving again. I can't make myself look. I can't make myself stop listening. It's already playing. And this time, it's singing my name. The story ends here. Let's begin the next one. My upstairs neighbor keeps dropping something heavy every night at exactly 2:47 a.m. I'm writing this at 3:15 a.m. because I just can't deal with this anymore. I need advice or validation or just to know I'm not losing my mind. I moved into my apartment in downtown Chicago 6 weeks ago. It's a vintage building from the 1920s, converted into studios and one-bedrooms. The rent is decent for the location, hardwood floors, big windows, exactly what I was looking for. I'm on the 4th floor, Unit 4B. The problem started my very first night. I was lying in bed around 2:30 a.m., almost asleep, when I heard the loudest thud I've ever heard in my life. It came from directly above me, from apartment 5B. It sounded like someone had dropped a bowling ball or a sack of concrete. The whole ceiling shook. Picture frames rattled on my walls. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, waiting to hear footsteps or voices or something that would explain what just fell. Nothing. Total silence. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. exactly. I figured maybe someone dropped something while moving furniture or unpacking. Annoying. But it was a one-time thing. I went back to sleep. The next night, same thing. 2:47 a.m. Thud. Same volume, same intensity. My whole apartment vibrated. This time, I got out of bed and walked around. I was trying to figure out exactly where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be right above my bedroom, which would put it in the middle of the apartment above me. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening. No other sounds. No footsteps, no voices, no TV. Nothing. The next morning, I went upstairs to talk to my neighbor. I knocked on the door of 5B. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the building manager. Her name is Carol, and she's probably 70 years old, been managing this building for 30 years. I asked her about the tenant in 5B. "Oh, 5B is vacant," she said. "Has been for about 3 months. We're renovating it before we put it back on the market." "Are you sure? I keep hearing loud noises from up there at night." She frowned. "That's impossible. The apartment is locked. No one has access except me and the contractors, and they only come during the day." "Could you check? Maybe there's a leak or the pipes are making noise or something." She agreed to take a look. We went up together, and she unlocked the door. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. The floors were covered in dust. You could see our footprints in it, and there were no other footprints anywhere. No one had been in this apartment recently. Carol checked every room, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, closets, all empty. She checked the pipes, the radiator, the windows. Everything looked fine. "I don't know what to tell you," she said. "There's nothing here that could make a loud noise. Maybe it's coming from a different apartment, and the sound is traveling funny through the building. Old buildings do that." That made sense, I guess. Sound can be weird in old buildings. I thanked her and went back to my apartment. That night, 2:47 a.m. Thud. I grabbed my phone and opened the recording app. I wanted to document this. The next night, same thing. I recorded it. When I played it back, you could clearly hear the thud. It was loud, deep, and it was definitely coming from above. I started keeping a log. Every single night, without fail, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the thud happened. Not 2:46, not 2:48, exactly 2:47. After a week of this, I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd lie awake from about 2:30 onwards, tensed up, waiting for it. Even when I tried to fall asleep earlier, I'd wake up right before it happened, like my body was anticipating it. I posted about it on Reddit, on a subreddit for apartment living. Most people said it was probably pipes, or the building settling, or maybe an animal in the walls. A few people suggested it might be a prank. Someone with access to the empty apartment messing with me. That got me thinking. I asked Carol if I could have a key to 5B just for a week so I could investigate. She was hesitant, but eventually agreed, as long as I promised not to disturb anything since they were planning to renovate. That night, at 2:45 a.m., I went upstairs with my phone and a flashlight. I unlocked the door to 5B and went inside. The apartment had the same layout as mine. Bedroom on the right, bathroom straight ahead, kitchen and living area to the left. I went to the spot directly above where I sleep, which would be the middle of the bedroom. I stood there watching the clock on my phone. 2:46, my heart was pounding. 2:47, nothing happened. I waited, still nothing, no thud, no sound at all, just silence. I walked through the entire apartment, checking every room. Nothing, no sound anywhere. Then I went back downstairs to my apartment. I lay down on my bed and checked my phone. 2:52 a.m. Had I somehow missed it? Was the sound not happening anymore? I was about to turn off my light when I heard it. Thud, right above me. I checked the time. 2:53 a.m. But I had just been up there. The apartment was silent at 2:47. So why did the thud happen at 2:53, 6 minutes later? Unless it didn't happen at the same time for everyone. The next night, I tried an experiment. I set up my phone to record in my bedroom, then went upstairs to 5B at 2:45. I recorded on my laptop up there too. At 2:47, nothing happened in 5B. I stayed until 2:55, then went back downstairs. I checked my phone recording. At 2:47, you could hear the thud, clear as day. But on the laptop recording from 5B, there was nothing. Complete silence. The sound was only happening in my apartment, or at least only I could hear it. That should have made me feel crazy, but actually it made me more convinced something was really wrong. Because my phone recordings proved the sound was real. It wasn't in my head. It was actually happening. I started researching the building's history. It was built in 1924, originally a hotel. In 1952, it was converted to apartments. I found old newspaper articles, building permits, historical society records. Then I found something interesting. An article from 1976, Tragedy at Riverside Apartments. A woman named Dorothy Kelvin had lived in apartment 5B. She was 34 years old, worked as a nurse. One night, she'd fallen in her apartment and hit her head on a corner of her dresser. She died from the head injury. Her body wasn't found for 3 days. The article said she was estimated to have died around 3 a.m. based on the coroner's report. I kept digging. I found Dorothy's obituary. There was a photo. A woman with dark curly hair smiling at the camera. She looked kind. The obituary said she was survived by her mother and a sister. I tried to find more details about how she died, but there wasn't much. Just that she'd fallen, hit her head, and died alone in her apartment. I thought about it. If she fell around 3 a.m. and I was hearing a thud at 2:47 a.m., that was 13 minutes before. Maybe the clocks were off in 1976? Or maybe I had the time wrong. I went back through all my recordings. Every single one was at 2:47 a.m. exactly. Then I had another thought. What if it wasn't when she fell? What if it was something else? I started having dreams. Weird, vivid dreams. I'd be in my apartment, but it would look different. The walls were a different color. The furniture was old-fashioned. I'd hear footsteps above me, pacing back and forth. Then a door would open, and the footsteps would come downstairs. In the dream, I'd get out of bed and walk to my door. I'd open it and look out into the hallway. There'd be a woman standing there, dark curly hair, wearing a nurse's uniform. She'd look at me and put her finger to her lips. Shh. Then I'd wake up, always at exactly 2:47 a.m., right as the thud happened. After 2 weeks of this, I was barely functioning. I was calling in, sick to work, sleeping during the day, avoiding my apartment at night. My friends were worried about me. One suggested I see a doctor, maybe get sleeping pills. I decided to try one more thing. I went to the library and looked through the archives of old newspapers on microfiche. I was searching for anything else about Dorothy Kelvin or apartment 5B. I found something. An article from 3 weeks before Dorothy died. It was small, just a few paragraphs buried in the crime section. Police are investigating a suspicious person reported in the Riverside Apartments building. Multiple residents have reported seeing a man in the hallways late at night who does not live in the building. The man is described as tall, wearing dark clothing. Anyone with information is asked to contact police. 3 weeks later, Dorothy was dead. The police ruled it an accident. But what if it wasn't? I started thinking about the timing. 2:47 a.m., what if that wasn't when she fell? What if that was when someone broke into her apartment? I imagined the scenario, Dorothy asleep in 5B. A sound wakes her at 2:47 a.m. Heavy footsteps, someone coming into her apartment. She gets up startled. There's a confrontation. She runs, he chases, she falls or she's pushed and hits her head. The thud I was hearing wasn't her falling. It was the moment of the break-in. The moment everything went wrong. But why was I hearing it? Why was it repeating every night? I called Carol again and asked if I could see any records from 1976. Anything about Dorothy Kelvin's death or the investigation afterward. She said she didn't have anything that old, but she gave me the number of the building's owner, a property management company. I called them. The woman who answered said she'd have to check their archives. A week later, she called me back. They did have some files from 1976. She could send me copies. When the copies arrived, I went through everything. Maintenance records, tenant complaints, police reports. Most of it was routine stuff. But there was one police report from April 1976, a month after Dorothy died. A tenant in 4B, my apartment, had reported that someone had tried to break into their apartment in the middle of the night. They heard someone trying the doorknob, then footsteps running away. Police investigated, but found no signs of forced entry and no suspects. The tenant moved out 2 weeks later. I felt cold. Someone had tried to break into 4B. The same night Dorothy died, or around the same time, someone had been targeting apartments on the 4th floor. I looked at the tenant's name on the police report. Sarah Chin. I tried to find Sarah Chin. It took me days of searching, but I finally found an obituary. Sarah Chin had died in 1982, at age 56. The obituary mentioned she was survived by a daughter, Lisa Chin, living in Evanston. I found Lisa on Facebook. I sent her a message explaining who I was and why I was contacting her. I asked if her mother had ever talked about living at Riverside Apartments. She responded the next day. Yes, her mother had lived there briefly in the 1970s. She'd moved out suddenly and never wanted to talk about why. But Lisa remembered her mother having nightmares for years afterward. She'd wake up screaming about a man in the hallway, a man trying to get into the apartment. I asked if her mother had ever mentioned the woman who died upstairs. Lisa said yes. Her mother felt guilty about it. She'd heard noises from upstairs the night Dorothy died, heavy footsteps, thumping sounds, but she thought it was just Dorothy moving furniture or something. She didn't call the police or check on her. If she had, maybe Dorothy would have survived. After Dorothy's death, Sarah started hearing the sounds every night, a thud at the same time. She thought it was her imagination, guilt manifesting as auditory hallucinations, but it drove her out of the apartment. I thanked Lisa and ended the conversation. I sat in my apartment, trying to process everything. Dorothy Kelvin died in 5B in 1976. Someone had broken in or tried to break in. Maybe he killed her. Maybe she fell while trying to escape. Either way, she died. Sarah Chin, living in 4B, heard it happen. She heard the moment the intruder broke in, the heavy thud of a door being forced or a body hitting the floor or something else. And she did nothing. After Dorothy died, Sarah started hearing the sound every night, the same thud at the same time, a reminder of what she'd heard and ignored. Now, almost 50 years later, I was living in 4B, and I was hearing it too. But why? I didn't even know Dorothy. I had nothing to do with what happened to her. Unless that's not how it works, unless the sound isn't about guilt. It's about the space. The apartment itself holds the memory of that night, and anyone who lives in 4B hears it over and over the moment when Dorothy's life ended. I decided to test a theory. I asked Carol if anyone else had lived in 4B between 1976 and now. She pulled up the records, 4 tenants between Sarah Chin and me. None of them stayed longer than 6 months. I asked if she knew why they left. She said she didn't have details, but she remembered the last tenant before me complained about noise from upstairs. They broke their lease early. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Sarah. Everyone who lived in 4B heard it. I had to make a decision. I could break my lease and leave like everyone else. Or I could try to do something about it. I know this sounds crazy, but I felt like I owed it to Dorothy. She died alone, possibly murdered, and no one did anything. Sarah heard it happening and didn't help. The police ruled it an accident and moved on. For almost 50 years, she's been forgotten, except for this sound, this nightly reminder that something terrible happened and no one cared enough to find out the truth. I went back to the police records. Dorothy's case was closed decades ago, but I wanted to know if there was anything else. I filed a FOIA request for any investigation records related to her death. It took 3 weeks, but I got a response. They sent me copies of the original police report, the coroner's report, and the investigation notes. The police had investigated it as a possible homicide initially. Dorothy had defensive wounds on her hands. There were signs of a struggle, but there were no witnesses, no suspects, and no forensic evidence that could prove someone else had been there. Eventually, they ruled it an accidental death due to lack of evidence. But one detective's notes stood out. He'd written, "Victim's neighbor in 4B reported hearing disturbance around 2:45, 3 a.m., but did not investigate. Could not definitively establish if disturbance was related to victim's death. No other witnesses." Sarah had told the police she heard something, but she didn't check, and the police couldn't prove it mattered. There was also a note about a suspect. Person of interest, building maintenance worker, Thomas Alvin, 28. Multiple tenants reported Alvin had made inappropriate comments to female residents. Alvin quit job 3 days after victim's death, unable to locate for interview. Thomas Alvin, a maintenance worker who had access to all the apartments, who'd been creeping out female tenants, who disappeared right after Dorothy died. I searched for Thomas Alvin. I found a record of him in the Illinois criminal database. He'd been arrested in 1978, 2 years after Dorothy's death, for breaking and entering. He served 3 years in prison. After that, the record went cold. I searched for obituaries, death records, anything. I finally found a death certificate. Thomas Alvin died in 2003, age 55, in Indiana. Cause of death: liver failure. He was dead. If he had killed Dorothy, he'd never been punished for it. He'd lived another 27 years and died of natural causes. I don't know what I expected to happen after I found all this out. Some kind of closure, maybe. A feeling that I'd solved a mystery. But that night, at 2:47 a.m., the thud still happened. I got out of bed and stood in the middle of my room, right under where the sound came from. I spoke out loud, feeling ridiculous, but needing to do something. "Dorothy, I know what happened to you. I know someone hurt you. I'm sorry no one helped you. I'm sorry you were alone." The thud came right on time. But this time, after it, I heard something else. Footsteps, light ones, walking across the floor above me. Then they stopped. My door was locked, but I heard my doorknob turn. Slowly, like someone was testing it, I stood frozen, staring at the door. The knob turned all the way, then released. The footsteps moved away down the hallway outside my apartment. I ran to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, right in front of my door, there was something. I unlocked the door and looked. It was a small piece of paper, yellowed with age. On it, in handwriting that looked old-fashioned, were 2 words, "Thank you." I picked it up. It felt real, solid. I brought it inside and examined it. The paper was thin, fragile, like it was decades old. The ink was faded, but legible. I kept the note. I didn't know what else to do with it. That night, for the first time in 6 weeks, the thud didn't happen at 2:47 a.m. I woke up at 2:50, confused by the silence. I checked my phone. It was definitely after 2:47. The sound hadn't happened. I stayed awake until 4 a.m., waiting, but nothing. The next night, same thing. No thud. Complete silence. It's been 3 days now. The sound hasn't come back. I'm sleeping through the night for the first time since I moved in. I don't know what happened. I don't know if Dorothy somehow heard me, if acknowledging what happened to her was enough to give her peace. I don't know if ghosts are real, or if this was all some weird psychological phenomenon related to the building structure and my subconscious knowledge of its history. All I know is that it stopped. Carol called me yesterday. She said something strange happened. The contractors who were supposed to renovate 5B went in to start work, and they found something behind a loose baseboard in the bedroom, a small box, hidden there for decades. Inside the box were personal items, a bracelet, some letters, a photo, all belonging to Dorothy Kelvin. The letters were from her mother, sent right before Dorothy died. One of them mentioned that Dorothy had been scared recently, that she'd told her mother she felt like someone was watching her. Carol asked if I wanted to see the items before she turned them over to the Historical Society. I said yes. The photo showed Dorothy smiling in her nurse's uniform. On the back, in the same handwriting from the note, it said, "First day at County Hospital, 1975. It was definitely her handwriting, which means the note I found was real. Somehow, impossibly, Dorothy had left me a thank you note. I gave everything to the Historical Society, along with all the research I'd done about her death. They're going to create a small exhibit about her life. It's not much, but at least she'll be remembered for more than just how she died. Last night, I had another dream. I was in my apartment, and I heard footsteps above me, but this time they were light, peaceful. I looked up at the ceiling, and I felt calm. When I woke up, I found another note on my bedside table. Same paper, same handwriting. I can rest now. I'm not scared anymore. I don't know if Dorothy's still here or if she's moved on. But I think she knows someone finally cared about what happened to her. Someone tried to find the truth. The building manager told me yesterday that they're going to put up a small plaque in the lobby mentioning Dorothy and other long-term residents who made the building their home. It's a small gesture, but it means something. I'm staying in the apartment. I signed a lease extension. 4B doesn't scare me anymore. If anything, it feels peaceful now, like a weight has been lifted. Sometimes at night, I think I hear light footsteps above me, but they're not heavy or menacing. They're just someone walking around their home. Finally, at peace. And I sleep through the night, every night, without any interruptions. Whatever happened, whatever was causing that sound, it's over now. Dorothy can rest, and so can I. And that ends this story. A new one starts now. Something keeps knocking from inside the walls. At exactly 3:17 a.m. The house on Hemlock Street wasn't chosen. It was assigned a corporate relocation package with non-negotiable terms. Live here or lose the job that was my only lifeline after the divorce. The Victorian was grand in the way decaying things are grand, imposing, with gingerbread trim bleached bone white by decades of sun, a wraparound porch that sagged like a tired spine, and windows that watched the street with the blank, dusty eyes of the long dead. The realtor, a woman whose smile never reached her tired eyes, called it a fixer-upper with character. She didn't mention the silence that wasn't peaceful, but watchful. She didn't mention the smell that lingered beneath the fresh paint and lemon oil, a faint, cloying sweetness like overripe peaches left in a closed cupboard, mixed with the damp chill of deep earth. And she certainly didn't mention the knocking. It started on the third night. I was deep in the fragile sleep of exhaustion, tangled in unfamiliar sheets in the master bedroom on the second floor. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 3:16 a.m. The house was utterly still, the kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums until you hear your own blood rushing. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., it began. Thump! Not loud, not startlingly so, just a single, solid thump, like a heavy sack of flour dropped onto a wooden floor. It came from inside the wall beside the bed. The old plaster vibrated faintly against my back where I lay. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. Rats? Old pipes settling? The house was ancient. Such things happened. I waited, straining my ears. Silence. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I exhaled, willing my muscles to relax. Just the house settling. Go back to sleep. The next night, same time, 3:17 a.m. Thump. Louder this time, closer, like it was moving through the wall cavity towards the head of the bed. My skin prickled. I lay rigid, eyes wide in the darkness, every nerve ending alight. The silence that followed was thicker, heavier, expectant. I didn't sleep again that night. By the fifth night, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, hands trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed at 3:15 a.m., staring at the wall, a baseball bat resting across my knees. 3:16. The air grew colder, a deep, bone-chilling cold that seeped through the plaster and into my bones. My breath fogged in the moonlight, slicing through the window. 317. Thump. Not just a thump. A bang. Violent, insistent, like a fist pounding on the inside of the wall right at head height. The plaster dust sifted down onto the bedspread. I jumped, gripping the bat, half rising. "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin, ridiculous in the suffocating quiet. No answer, just the echo of the bang fading into the house's bones. The cold receded slowly, leaving me shivering, sweat cooling on my skin. It wasn't rats, it wasn't pipes, it was calling. At the same time every night, a ritual, a summons. I started researching. The local historical society archives were dusty and smelled of mildew. The house was built in 1898 for Silas Crow, a reclusive watchmaker. His wife Eleanor died of consumption in 1905. They had one son, Thomas. Thomas vanished in 1923 at the age of 28. No body found. Presumed drowned in the river. The file contained a single faded photograph, a stern-faced man, a frail woman holding a small boy with dark, solemn eyes, and a note handwritten on the margin in spidery ink. Young Crow was prone to night terrors, spent weeks locked in his room before he disappeared. Neighbors reported strange knocking sounds from the walls at odd hours. 3:17 a.m. wasn't odd. It was specific, obsessively specific. The knocking became my anchor to a waking nightmare. I stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. I dragged an air mattress to the sunroom on the first floor. 3:17 a.m. Thump. From the wall beside the daybed, I moved to the guest room down the hall. 3:17 a.m. Thump. From the shared wall with the master bedroom, I tried the basement, a damp concrete space filled with old trunks and the furnace's groan. 3:17 a.m. Thump. From the ceiling directly above me, so violent it shook dust from the rafters. It wasn't tied to a room, it was tied to me. And to the time, 3:17 a.m. The witching hour? No, something else. I checked the newspaper archives for the date Thomas Crow vanished, November 3rd, 1923. The time of his last sighting, 3:17 a.m. He'd been seen arguing with his father near the river dock. He never came home. The police report listed his personal effects found near the water. A pocket watch stopped at 3:17. The house wasn't haunted by a generic spirit. It was haunted by Thomas Crow's final, trapped moment. The knocking wasn't a ghost trying to get out. It was the sound of him trying to get back in. To the house, to the room where he lived, to the life he'd been torn from, and it was resonating through the walls, a desperate echo, seeking its source. The cold wasn't just cold anymore. It was the chill of the riverbank in November, the smell of overripe peaches, the scent of the orchard that used to border the property where Thomas was said to have played as a child. The house was replaying his memory, and I was the audience, the unwilling witness. I couldn't take it. I called the only person I thought might understand, the reclusive historian who'd helped me with the archives, Dr. Eris Thorne. His voice on the phone was dry, like dead leaves. "Hemlock Street? 3:17? He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "That's the Crow Boy's time. He's not trying to scare you. He's trying to remember. The house, it holds on to pain like a sponge, especially the moment of severing, his." He paused. "The knocking. It's him hitting the wall from the inside of his own memory, trapped in that second, over and over. He needs an anchor, something from then to tether him here. Otherwise, the echo just grows louder, more desperate, until it breaks something." "What something?" I whispered, my throat tight. "The wall," Thorne said grimly. "Or your mind. Find what he lost. Find the watch. It's the key. He died holding it. It's the only thing that bridges his time and yours. Bring it to the wall at 3:9. Let him feel it. It might quiet the echo." Finding the watch felt impossible, lost to the river for a century. But Thorne mentioned a detail from the police report. Thomas's father, Silas, had been a watchmaker. He'd made the pocket watch for his son's 18th birthday, unique, engraved. Silas, consumed by grief and guilt, rumors swirled he'd argued Thomas into leaving that night, had never thrown anything of his son's away. His workshop, in the small shed behind the house, had been sealed after his death in 1930. "Check the shed," Thorne urged. "If it's anywhere, it's there, behind a loose floorboard, in a false bottom drawer." Silas couldn't bear to look at it, but he couldn't bear to part with it either. The shed was a dilapidated wooden structure choked by ivy, its door rusted shut. I kicked it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from a grimy window. Shelves lined the walls, covered in tools, gears, springs, and the ghostly outlines of removed items. A workbench stood in the center, scarred and stained with oil. My fingers trembled as I pulled up loose floorboards, pried at the back of drawers, tapped walls for hollow spaces. Nothing. Despair clawed at me. Then I noticed the workbench itself. The wood was warped, but one section near the leg seemed newer, less stained. I pried at it with a screwdriver. It lifted. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth brittle with age, was a small leather pouch. Inside was the watch, heavy, silver, tarnished black in places. I opened it with numb fingers. The glass face was cracked, frozen forever at 3:17. The interior lid bore a single engraving. To Thomas, time is love, Father. That night, I didn't flee. I faced it. At 3:15 a.m., I stood in the master bedroom, the cold already seeping from the walls, frosting my breath. The pocket watch was heavy in my palm, ice cold. I pressed it flat against the wall where the knocking always started, right at head height. The plaster was freezing. I closed my eyes, holding my breath, waiting. 3:17 a.m. Silence. No thump, no bang. Just the frantic pounding of my own heart. Had it worked? Had the watch? Then a new sound, not from inside the wall, from right beside me. A soft, wet, gurgling sigh, like water draining from a clogged sink. I snapped my eyes open. Standing inches away, partially translucent, shimmering like heat haze off pavement, was a young man, early 20s, dressed in clothes from another century. Trousers, a white shirt, suspenders. His hair was dark, plastered wetly to his forehead. Water dripped from his clothes, pooling on the floorboards at his feet. His eyes were wide, terrified, fixed on the wall where I held the watch. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me at the memory of his last moment. And he was shivering violently, his lips blue, his skin the color of river clay. He reached out a dripping hand towards the watch, his fingers passing through the metal, through my hand, holding it. A look of profound, heart-wrenching confusion crossed his face. He couldn't touch it. He couldn't grasp the anchor. He was trapped in the echo, unable to step into the present, unable to touch the proof of his own existence. The gurgling sigh became a choked sob. Tears, clear as river water, streamed down his pale cheeks. He looked at me then, his eyes locking onto mine, not with malice, with a desperate, drowning plea. Help me. The cold intensified, biting deep. The smell of river mud and wet wool filled the air. The pocket watch vibrated in my hand, a frantic, terrified pulse. Thomas wasn't just knocking, he was drowning. Over and over, in the memory of that November morning, pulled under by the current of his own unresolved end. The watch was ashore, but he couldn't reach it. I did the only thing I could think of. I didn't just hold the watch against the wall. I pressed it into the plaster, hard. Ignoring the splinters, ignoring the cold that burned like fire, I poured every ounce of my focus, my will, my desperate desire to help into that point of contact. Thomas, I whispered, my voice raw, it's real, you're real, take it, hold on. The vibration in the watch surged. The young man's form flickered, grew momentarily more solid. His dripping hand pressed flat against the wall, right over the watch. For a fraction of a second, his fingers seemed to touch the metal. A look of pure, radiant relief flooded his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first breath he had taken in a century. The gurgling sigh eased. Then the light from the window seemed to shift. Not the moonlight. A soft, golden, dawn-like light began to emanate from the wall itself, from the spot where the watch was pressed. It wasn't hot, it was warm, like sunlight on stone. Thomas stepped into the light, not through the wall, but into the glow. His form became less translucent, more solid, more peaceful. The water stopped dripping from his clothes. The terrible blue tinge left his lips. He looked at me one last time, not with fear, with gratitude. A small, sad smile touched his lips. He raised a hand, not in farewell, but in benediction. Then he turned and walked, not into the wall, but upwards, following the shaft of golden light that seemed to stretch towards the ceiling, towards the sky beyond. He dissolved into the light, like mist burning off a river at sunrise. The pocket watch in my hand grew warm. The frantic vibration stilled. The cold vanished, replaced by a deep, comforting warmth that seeped from the wall into my bones. The smell of river mud faded, replaced by the clean scent of rain-washed earth. The silence that fell wasn't the watchful, hungry silence of before. It was the deep, peaceful quiet of a burden lifted, of a debt paid. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face, the warm watch clasped tightly in my hand. Dawn painted the room in soft pinks and golds. The house felt different, lighter, freer. The walls no longer felt like prison bars, but like shelter. I still live in a house on Hemlock Street. The realtor was right. It has character, but it's no longer haunted by a trapped moment. It's inhabited by peace. I keep the pocket watch on the mantelpiece in the living room. It doesn't keep time. The hands are still frozen at 3:17, but sometimes, on quiet mornings, I swear I feel a faint, warm pulse coming from it. Not a knock, a heartbeat, steady, calm, finally, at rest. And I know Thomas is no longer drowning in the dark. He found a shore, because someone finally held out a hand. Someone finally listened to the knocking from inside the walls. The house is quiet now, truly quiet. And for the first time in 100 years, the silence is a gift. And that is the end of this story. Now let's begin a new one. The Archive of the Unclaimed. I am writing this statement on a piece of paper I stole from the lobby of a police station in Nebraska. I don't live in Nebraska. I don't know anyone in Nebraska. But I drove until my car ran out of gas, and this is where I stopped. My hands are stained black. No matter how much I scrub them with industrial soap, the blackness doesn't come off. It's not ink. It's not oil. It's underneath the skin. If you are reading this, do not take the job at the sub-level 4 storage facility in Detroit. If you see an ad on a telephone pole or a Craigslist post asking for a night archivist with a pay rate of $40 an hour, cash, close your eyes. Walk away. Forget you ever saw it. I was 26 years old. I was a dropout with a mountain of debt and a landlord who liked to bang on my door at 6 a.m. asking for rent money I didn't have. I was desperate. That is the word that defines everyone who ends up at the archive. Desperation. I met the hiring manager, a man named Mr. Calloway, in a portable office trailer sitting in the middle of a fenced-off concrete lot. He was a small man, bald with glasses so thick his eyes looked like tiny black beads swimming in water. He didn't ask for a resume. He didn't ask for a background check. "Can you lift 50 pounds?" he asked. His voice was dry like sandpaper rubbing together. "Yes," I said. "Are you claustrophobic?" "No." "Do you have family that checks on you daily?" "No," I lied. I had a mom in Ohio, but we hadn't talked in months. "Good," Calloway said. He stamped a piece of paper. "You start tonight, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Your job is simple. You walk the rows. You check for moisture. You check for structural integrity of the boxes. And you never, under any circumstances, open a box marked with a red tag." "What's in the boxes with red tags?" I asked. Calloway looked up. His beady eyes went cold. "Personal effects of the unclaimed. Things the state doesn't know what to do with, but can't destroy. Just check the humidity, kid. Don't be a hero." The facility wasn't a building. It was a hole. To get to work, I had to take a freight elevator that rattled and screamed as it descended. It took 3 full minutes to get to the bottom, sub-level 4. It was deep enough that the air felt heavy. It pressed against your eardrums. It smelled of old paper, mildew, and something sharp and metallic, like pennies that had been soaking in vinegar. The archive was massive. It was a concrete cavern filled with endless rows of metal shelving. The shelves went up 20 feet, reaching the dark ceiling where flickering fluorescent tube lights buzzed like dying insects. The rows stretched back so far you couldn't see the end. It was a labyrinth of cardboard and steel. My station was a small desk near the elevator. I had a flashlight, a clipboard, and a radio that only received static. The first week was agonizingly boring. I walked the rows. My footsteps echoed, creating a slap, slap, slap sound that bounced off the concrete walls. I shined my light on thousands of boxes. Most were white bankers' boxes with boring labels. Tax records 1998, city plan in depth, court transcripts. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that hurts. If I stopped walking, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system, which sounded like a giant beast breathing in its sleep. The weirdness started on the second Monday. I was in row 40, a section called the Deep Stacks. This was where the older boxes were. The air was colder back there. The lights were dimmer. I was checking a shelf when I heard it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like a mouse scratching at cardboard. Great, I muttered. Rats. I took my flashlight and followed the sound. It was coming from a box on the bottom shelf. It was an old box, brown and sagging. It had a red tag. The label on the tag was handwritten in faded black marker. Item, Cash 8490. Unknown. Origin, recovered from Site B. I crouched down. The scratching was coming from inside the box. Scritch, scritched. Then it stopped. Hello? I whispered. I felt stupid talking to a box. A voice whispered back. It wasn't a rat. It was a human voice, a woman's voice. It's so tight, she whispered. My fingers are breaking. I fell backward, landing hard on the concrete. I scrambled away, shining my light on the box. It sat there, motionless. Who's there? I shouted. My voice cracked. Silence. I stood up, shaking. I told myself it was the acoustics, the ventilation fans playing tricks on my tired brain. I marked check for rodents on my clipboard and practically ran back to my desk. I didn't tell Calloway. I needed the money. I couldn't lose this job over a hallucination. 3 nights later, the leaking started. I was doing my rounds in row 12. I smelled it before I saw it. It smelled like rotten lilacs and burnt hair. It was a thick, cloying scent that coated the back of my throat. I followed the smell to a shelf at eye level. There was a box with a red tag. Label, family case. 102, evidence. A black liquid was oozing out of the bottom corner of the box. It wasn't water. It was thick, viscous, like tar or molasses. It dripped onto the floor with a heavy plop, plop, plop. I shone my flashlight on the puddle. The black liquid was moving. It wasn't flowing downhill. It was swirling, bubbling, as if it was boiling, but the room was freezing cold. As I watched, the puddle stretched out a thin tendril, like a finger, reaching toward the toe of my boot. I stepped back. Nope, 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 nope. I grabbed my radio. Calloway? Mr. Calloway, are you there? Static. I walked back to the desk to use the landline phone. It was dead. No dial tone, just a low, rhythmic thumping sound on the line, like a heartbeat. I went back to row 12 with a roll of duct tape. I don't know why. I thought maybe I could seal the box. When I got back to row 12, the box was gone. The shelf was empty. The puddle of black slime was gone. The floor was dry. I checked the row number, row 12. I was sure of it. Then I looked at the shelf above. The box was there. It had moved up one shelf. I hadn't touched it. There was no one else in the facility. The elevator hadn't moved. I stared at the box. The black liquid was now seeping through the cardboard faster, soaking the bottom. "Why did you move?" I whispered. The box vibrated. It shook violently, rattling against the metal shelf. Then a sound came from inside. Not a whisper this time, a scream. It was a muffled, high-pitched scream of absolute agony. It sounded like a man being crushed in a compactor. "Let me out!" The scream was so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. I dropped my flashlight. Darkness swallowed the row. I scrambled on the floor, feeling for the metal cylinder. My hand brushed against something wet, something sticky. I recoiled. I found the light and clicked it on. The black slime was on my hand. It burned. It felt like acid. I wiped it on my pants, panicking. The screaming stopped. The box sat there, silent. I ran. I ran all the way to the elevator and hit the button. I stood there shivering, waiting for the slow, agonizing descent of the cage. When it finally arrived, I took it up to the surface and sat in my car until sunrise. I should have quit then. I really should have. But I checked my bank account balance on my phone. -$40. Rent was due in 2 days. I went back. God help me, I went back. That was night 7, the last night. When I arrived, Calloway wasn't in the trailer. The door was unlocked. His coffee cup was on the desk, mold growing in the cold liquid. A note was taped to the monitor. "Check row 99. Urgent!" I'd never been to row 99. The facility supposedly ended at row 80. I took the elevator down. The air was different tonight. It was hot, humid. The smell of rotten lilacs was everywhere, overpowering. I walked past rows, 10, 20, 50. The lights were buzzing louder, popping and flickering. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. I reached row 80. Behind it, there was a heavy plastic tarp hanging from the ceiling, painted with a warning, "Do not enter. Structural instability." I pulled the tarp back. There was a tunnel. It wasn't concrete anymore. The walls were rough-hewn rock, braced with old rotting wood beams. Shelves had been hammered directly into the rock. This was row 99. The boxes here weren't cardboard. They were wooden crates bound in chains. Some were metal safes. All of them had red tags. But the tags didn't have numbers anymore. They had names: Allison, Michael, the Traveler, Subject 4, and they were all leaking. The floor of the tunnel was covered in inches of the black sludge. It rippled like a dark ocean. I stepped onto a wooden pallet to keep my boots dry. "Hello?" I called out. "Mr. Calloway?" I heard a splashing sound further down the tunnel. I shone my light. Mr. Calloway was standing at the end of the tunnel, facing the wall. He was standing shin-deep in the black slime. "Mr. Calloway?" I said, stepping closer. "We need to get out of here. It's flooding." Calloway didn't turn around, but he spoke. "It's not flooding, Jack. It's emptying." He knew my name. I had never told him my name. "What do you mean?" I asked. Calloway turned around slowly. My stomach dropped. His eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with the black sludge. It poured down his cheeks like tears. His mouth was open in a rictus grin, and the sludge was bubbling up from his throat, spilling over his lips. They aren't personal effects, Jack, Calloway gurgled. The voice sounded wet, thick. They are the discarded, the memories people cut out, the sins cities want to bury, and they are so hungry. Calloway took a step toward me. The black sludge on the floor rose up. It wasn't liquid. It was a hive mind. It formed shapes, hands. Hundreds of black, oily hands rising from the muck, grasping at the air. "Join the archive," Calloway said. He spread his arms. The hands grabbed his legs. They pulled. Calloway didn't scream. He laughed. He laughed as the sludge pulled him down. He sank like he was in quicksand. The blackness swallowed his waist, his chest, his neck. His head remained above the surface for a moment. "Check the box, Jack," he whispered. "Your box." Then he was gone. I backed away, terrified. The sludge was rushing toward me, a tidal wave of oil and hate. I turned to run, but I slipped. I fell face first onto a wooden crate. My light shined on the label, Jackson Miller, the night archivist. It was my name. It was my box, and it was shaking. Something inside was pounding on the wood. Thump, thump, thump. "Let me out!" A voice screamed from inside the box. It was my voice. It was me inside the box. I stared at it, paralyzed. How could I be in the box if I was standing here? The lid of the crate began to pry open. Black fingers curled over the edge. A face pushed its way out. It was my face, but it was made of the black slime. It had my eyes, my nose, my mouth, but it was melting, shifting. "You're late for your shift," the thing that looked like me hissed. I scrambled backward. The sludge on the floor grabbed my boot. It burned. It felt like it was eating through the leather. I kicked my foot loose, leaving the boot behind. I ran. I ran back through the tunnel, past the tarp, into the concrete section. The archive was alive. Every box in every row was rattling, millions of boxes, a cacophony of scratching, screaming, and crying. The noise was deafening. It sounded like a stadium full of people burning to death. The black liquid was pouring from the shelves, creating waterfalls of slime. I sprinted for the elevator. My sock was soaked in the sludge. My foot felt numb, dead. I reached the elevator. I hit the button. Nothing happened. I hit it again. "Come on, come on!" I looked back at the rows. A wave of blackness was rushing down the main aisle. At the crest of the wave was Calloway, or what was left of him. His body was fused with others. Faces I didn't know, women, children, men, all screaming in unison. "The Unclaimed!" the collective voice roared. I pried the elevator doors open with my fingers. The car wasn't there. It was still at the top. There was a ladder in the shaft. I didn't hesitate. I jumped for the ladder. I climbed until my muscles screamed. Below me, the sludge filled the elevator shaft. It was rising. I could hear them climbing the ladder behind me, wet, slapping sounds. Slap, slap, slap. "We remember you, Jack," the voices whispered from the dark below. "We have your debt. We have your fear." I reached the top, sub-level 1, then the lobby. I burst out of the shaft door and rolled onto the linoleum floor of the loading dock. It was night outside. The air was cool. I ran to my car. I drove. I didn't look back at the warehouse. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove for 3 days straight. I stole gas. I slept in rest stops for 20 minutes at a time. I thought I escaped, but yesterday I stopped at a gas station to wash my hands. My foot had turned black. The skin was hard, like a shell, and my hands, the stains won't come off. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened an hour ago. I was sitting in this police station lobby trying to work up the courage to turn myself in to tell them everything. A delivery man walked in. He was carrying a package, a brown cardboard box. He set it on the counter near me. The label on the box caught my eye. Jackson Miller, recovered effects. It had a red tag, and it was leaking. A single drop of black liquid fell from the corner of the box and hit the pristine white floor. Plop! I heard a scratching sound from inside. Scritch, scritch, and then a whisper. "I'm still in here, Jack. You left me in the dark." I stood up and walked out. I left my car. I'm walking now. I'm walking into the cornfields. I can feel the blackness spreading up my leg. It feels cold. It feels heavy. I know what happens when it reaches my heart. I won't die. That would be too easy. I will become a box. And someone, some desperate kid who needs money, is going to be hired to watch me. Please, if you see the ad, if you see the job for the archive, don't let me out. Whatever you do, don't let me out. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The dead frequency of station K109. I am writing this on a typewriter because I can no longer trust anything with a screen. If you see a digital clock flicker, if your phone buzzes but no one is calling, if the radio in your car turns on by itself, run. Do not investigate. Do not try to tune it in. Just run until you find silence. My name is Elias. I was a radio enthusiast, a ham operator, the kind of guy who spent his weekends building antennas in his backyard and listening to static from across the ocean. I love the noise. I love the idea that the air around us is filled with invisible voices just waiting to be caught. I found the job on a forum for vintage electronics. A user named Signal Master posted a request for a caretaker for an old AM radio station in the Mojave Desert. Station K109, night shift engineer, maintain transmitter, log signal strength, 3,000 month, cash, isolation required. It was perfect for me. I needed the money and I wanted to get away from the city, from the noise of modern life. I drove out to the coordinates. It was miles from civilization, a small concrete building at the base of a massive rusted radio tower that stretched hundreds of feet into the desert sky. The tower hummed. You could feel it in your teeth when you got close. The previous engineer was waiting for me. He was a thin, twitchy man named Ornate. He had dark circles under his eyes and chewed his fingernails until they bled. "It's automated," Ornate said, shoving a ring of keys into my hand. "The playlist is on a loop. Old jazz, big band, stuff nobody listens to. Your job is to keep the transmitter cool. Check the gauges. If the needle goes into the red, flip the breaker. That's it." "Why do you need a person here if it's automated?" I asked. Ornate looked at the tower. "Because sometimes it drifts. The signal drifts. You have to bring it back." "Drifts to where?" He didn't answer. He got in his truck and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. I settled in. The station was a time capsule. Reel-to-reel tape decks, vacuum tube amplifiers, a smell of ozone and old dust. The only modern thing was a small mini-fridge in the corner. The first week was peaceful. I sat in the control booth, watching the VU meters bounce to the rhythm of Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman. I read books. I drank coffee. I watched the sun set over the dunes. But on the 8th night, the drift started. It was 2:00 a.m. The station was playing a slow, mournful trumpet solo. Suddenly, the music warped. It slowed down, the pitch dropping until it sounded like a dying cow. Woo! Then static, white noise that sounded like screaming. I looked at the frequency dial. It had moved. We were supposed to be at 1090 a.m. The needle was drifting down 1080, 1070, 1060. I grabbed the manual tuning knob. It was hot to the touch. I tried to turn it back, but it fought me. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side. "Come on," I grunted, twisting hard. The static cleared, but it wasn't jazz. A voice cut through the speakers, a voice that sounded wet, gargled, like someone speaking with a throat full of water. "Is anyone listening?" I froze. This was a broadcast frequency. It shouldn't be picking up two-way traffic. I grabbed the microphone. "This is station K109. You are interrupting a broadcast. Identify yourself." Silence. Then a laugh, a dry, crackling laugh. "Elias, you have pretty eyes." I dropped the mic. It hit the desk with a thud. How did they know my name? I hadn't told anyone I was here except the forum user, and I used a pseudonym online. I wrestled the tuning knob back to 1090. The jazz returned, upbeat and cheerful, mocking my fear. I checked the transmitter logs. There was no record of the interruption. According to the machine, the jazz had been playing the whole time. I told myself it was interference. A trucker with a powerful CB radio messing with me. The next night, it got worse. I was doing my rounds, checking the massive cooling fans in the transmitter room. The hum of the tower was louder tonight. It felt heavy, pressing on my chest. As I walked past the main capacitor bank, I heard tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the metal casing of the transmitter. I stopped. "Hello?" Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, intelligent. I put my ear against the warm metal. "Let us out," a chorus of whispers said. It sounded like hundreds of people whispering in unison. "It burns! The wire burns!" I jumped back. Then the lights in the room flickered and died. The only light came from the glowing orange vacuum tubes inside the transmitter. In that dim orange light, I saw shadows moving, not on the walls, inside the tubes. The vacuum tubes were glass cylinders the size of milk jugs. Inside, filaments glowed to amplify the signal. But inside tube 4, something was crawling. A black, shadowy shape, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. It had a face of pure anguish, mouth open in a silent scream. I ran back to the control booth and locked the door. I grabbed the station phone to call the owner. "Signal, master." The line was dead. No dial tone, just the sound of wind. Then the wind stopped, and a voice spoke. "Don't leave, Elias. The broadcast is just starting." I slammed the phone down. I sat in the chair, staring at the glass window that looked out into the desert. It was pitch black outside. Then the on-air light turned on. I hadn't touched the console. The music stopped. A voice came over the studio monitors. It was my voice. "Welcome back to the midnight hour," the voice said. "Tonight, we have a special request for Elias. A song from the other side." Then a sound began to play. It wasn't music. It was the sound of digging. Shovels hitting dirt, crunch, scrape. Then the sound of wood splintering. A coffin lid breaking. Then heavy breathing. I covered my ears. "Stop it! Stop it!" I reached for the master brake to kill the power. My hand stopped inches from the switch. Pain. White-hot pain shot through my arm. I looked down. My veins. The veins in my arm were glowing orange, like the vacuum tubes. I could feel the electricity surging through me. I was becoming part of the circuit. "Do not cut the signal," my own voice said through the speakers. "We need the carrier wave. We need to travel." I fell to the floor, convulsing. The pain was unbearable. I could feel voices in my head, memories that weren't mine. I remembered dying in a fire. I remembered drowning in a lake. I remembered being buried alive. They were the voices of the dead, and they were using the radio tower as a bridge. I blacked out. I woke up the next morning on the floor. The sun was shining. The jazz was playing. My arm was burned, a Lichtenberg figure scar tracing down my skin like a lightning strike. I packed my bag. I was leaving. I didn't care about the money. I walked to my car. It wouldn't start. The battery was dead, completely drained. I checked my phone. Dead. I was stranded. I walked back to the station. I had to fix the car or find a radio to call for help. I went to the workshop in the back. I found a spare battery. As I was carrying it to the car, I looked up at the tower. There was something climbing it. A man. He was halfway up, clinging to the metal struts. "Hey!" I yelled. "Get down! It's dangerous!" He stopped. He turned his head 180 degrees like an owl. It was ornate, the previous engineer, but his eyes were gone, burned out sockets, and his mouth was sewn shut with copper wire. He let go of the tower. He fell hundreds of feet. I watched him hit the ground. Thud. I ran over to him. His body shattered on impact, but there was no blood. He was hollow. His skin was just a shell. Inside, he was filled with old radio parts, transistors, wires, capacitors. He was a machine made of meat and junk. And he was still moving. His broken hand reached up and grabbed my ankle. A voice came from his chest, sounding like a broken speaker. "You are the new component. You must maintain the signal." I kicked him off and ran. I ran into the desert. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran away from the tower. I walked for hours. The sun beat down on me. I was dehydrated, delirious. I saw a house in the distance, a small shack. I ran to it. "Help, please!" I burst through the door. It was the control room. I was back at the station. I had walked in a circle. No, I had walked straight. The space around the tower was warped. It was a loop. I collapsed in the chair. The sun went down. The on-air light turned on. "Welcome back, Elias," the voice said. "Tonight, we are going to open the channel wide." The frequency dial began to spin on its own, fast, a blur. The hum of the tower grew to a deafening roar. The glass of the control booth window shattered. Outside, in the desert, the sand began to vibrate. Shadows rose from the dunes, thousands of them. The ghosts of the airwaves, they floated toward the station. I knew what they wanted. They wanted a body. They wanted my body. I looked at the console. I couldn't turn it off. They controlled the power. But I saw the microphone cable. It was an XLR cable, thick and shielded. If I couldn't stop the signal, I had to stop the receiver. I grabbed the cable. I wrapped it around the main output transformer. I grounded the positive lead to the negative. A short circuit. I pulled tight. Boom! The console exploded. Sparks showered the room. Fire erupted from the tape decks. The screaming from the speakers turned into a high-pitched shriek of agony. "No!" The tower outside groaned. Metal twisted. I ran out the back door as the building caught fire. The tower was glowing red hot. The metal was melting. It collapsed. It fell in slow motion, crashing into the dunes with the force of a meteor. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I walked again. This time, the loop was broken. I found a highway by morning. I hitched a ride to the nearest town. I thought I was free, but I am not. I am writing this in a library. The person next to me is listening to music on headphones. I can hear it. Not the music. I can hear the static underneath the music. And in the static, I hear my name, Elias. We are still broadcasting. And my arm, the scar on my arm, is glowing, faintly, orange. I am a receiver now. I can't be around people. If I touch someone, they hear it too. They start to scream. They start to remember deaths they haven't died yet. I am going to the mountains, to a cave, somewhere deep underground where radio waves can't reach. If you hear a song on the radio that slows down, if you hear a voice that sounds like wet gravel, change the station, change it fast, before it changes you. And with that, this story fades into the dark. Let's quietly step into the next one. The ghost in my house isn't trying to scare me. It's trying to warn me. The house smelled like damp paper and forgotten things. Not the cozy cinnamon and dust scent of an old home, but the stale, hollow breath of abandonment. It crouched at the end of Sycamore Street, a 2-story craftsman with peeling sage-green paint, a sagging porch roof held up by one splintered beam, and windows so grimy the weak November sunlight barely penetrated the gloom inside. The rent was $450 a month, cash, no credit check, no questions asked. Just Mrs. Peabody, the ancient owner who lived 3 towns over, meeting me on the cracked front step with a ring of heavy keys and eyes that darted past my shoulder as she spoke. "Quiet street," she'd mumbled, her voice papery and thin. "House has history, good bones, just needs attention." She wouldn't look at the house directly. Her hand trembled as she handed me the keys. "Mind the basement door. It sticks. And the 3rd step on the back stairs, it's loose. Watch your step." She turned to leave before I could ask about utilities, vanishing into her battered Buick like a shadow retreating from light. I didn't care about the warnings. I needed walls. After the divorce papers were signed, the final, brutal severing after Mark's affair shattered the last 10 years of my life. I'd crashed on my sister's couch until her husband's polite coughs became too loud to ignore. This house, this decaying husk, was freedom, or at least shelter. I hauled my mismatched boxes inside, the empty rooms echoing with every footstep. The air was cold, unnaturally so for late autumn, carrying a faint Swedish undertone like old flowers left too long in stagnant water. The previous tenant, Mrs. Peabody said vaguely, was an elderly man who passed peacefully. No details, no forwarding address, just a single dusty armchair left in the living room and a lingering scent of menthol rub. The first week was just the usual settling in, chaos, unpacking, patching holes in the plaster walls, scrubbing decades of grime from the bathroom tiles. The house groaned and sighed like all old structures do. Floorboards creaked underfoot. Pipes clanked when the ancient radiator kicked on. I chalked the cold drafts to poor insulation and rattling windows to the wind whipping down the valley. But then the small things started. Things a rational mind tries desperately to explain away. My favorite mug, a chipped blue ceramic one Mark had bought me on our honeymoon in Mexico, was found one morning, not on the kitchen hook where I always hung it, but sitting squarely in the center of the dining table. I'd left it drying on the rack the night before. I blamed fatigue. Then my keys, meticulously placed on the hall table every evening, appeared on the bathroom sink twice in 3 days. I checked the locks obsessively, but the doors were always bolted tight, windows latched, no sign of forced entry, just misplaced objects. Annoying, but explicable. Stress, sleep deprivation, the house playing tricks on a mind already frayed by grief. Then came the cold spots. Not the diffuse chill of a drafty room, but focused, intense pockets of cold air that seemed to cling to specific places. One hovered near the foot of the stairs. Another lingered by the basement door. A heavy, scarred thing with a tarnished brass knob that refused to turn smoothly. The most persistent one settled in the corner of my bedroom, near the closet. It wasn't just cold. It felt dense, heavy, like stepping into water. I'd wake shivering in the night, pull the covers tighter, and find myself staring at that corner, a primal unease prickling my skin. My breath fogged in the moonlight, slicing through the window. I'd tell myself it was the house's poor heating, a draft from the old window frame, but the rationalizations felt flimsy, worn thin. The dreams started soon after, vivid, suffocating things. I'd be standing on the porch, looking down Sycamore Street, but the houses were wrong, tilted, melting like wax. A figure would appear at the end of the road, silhouetted against the streetlight, tall, broad-shouldered, walking slowly, deliberately toward the house. I never saw his face, only the shape of him radiating a quiet menace that froze me to the spot. I'd wake gasping, sweat cooling instantly in the bedroom's cold corner. The image burned into my mind. I started locking the front door twice at night, sliding the deadbolt with trembling hands, peering through the peephole into the empty, moonlit street. One rainy Tuesday, I came home from my part-time job at the library to find the kitchen flooded. Not a burst pipe flood, but a deliberate ankle-deep puddle spreading from the sink. The faucet was off, tight. Yet water streamed steadily from the tap's base, pooling on the linoleum. I mopped it up, cursing the ancient plumbing, but the next morning it was dry, bone dry, no trace of moisture, no explanation. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain drum on the roof, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tap, 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 coming from the living room, like knuckles rapping gently on wood, not the pipes, not the wind, deliberate, patient. I lay frozen, heart pounding against my ribs, until dawn painted the ceiling gray. When I crept downstairs, the room was empty, silent. But the armchair, the one left by the previous tenant, was turned slightly as if someone had just risen from it. Its faded floral upholstery was ice cold to the touch. Fear finally overrode my stubborn practicality. I bought sage from the New Age shop downtown, burning it in the corners, choking on the acrid smoke, whispering desperate pleas for whatever was here to leave me alone. Nothing changed. The cold spot in the bedroom deepened. The tapping continued on quiet nights, and the dreams intensified. The figure on Sycamore Street was closer now. I could almost make out the shape of a heavy coat, the glint of something metallic in his hand. I'd wake screaming, the echo of my own voice swallowed by the house's stillness, the cold corner pressing in like a physical weight. Then the warnings began, not subtle nudges, but urgent, impossible messages. I kept my medication, a low-dose antidepressant, in a small orange bottle on the kitchen counter. One morning, I opened it to find every single pill replaced with smooth gray river stones, identical in size and shape to the pills, but cold and inert. My blood ran cold. I hadn't left the bottle out. I kept it in the locked medicine cabinet. I poured the stones down the sink, hands shaking, and refilled it from my emergency stash in my suitcase. 2 days later, I found the bottle on the dining table again, empty. The pills were scattered across the floor beneath the basement door as if thrown violently. The basement door itself was slightly ajar, though I knew I'd latched it tight the night before. The heavy brass knob was icy. That same evening, I noticed the clocks. All of them. The battery-powered kitchen clock, the ancient wall clock in the hall, even my wristwatch, were stopped, stuck at 3:07 a.m. I reset them, replaced the kitchen clock's battery. By morning, they were all frozen again at 3:07. The time felt significant, but I couldn't place why. The final straw wasn't for me. It was for Mrs. Gable, the sweet, white-haired widow who lived 3 houses down. She'd taken a shine to me, bringing over a still warm apple pie my second week here, her eyes kind behind thick glasses. "You look like you carried a world, dear," she'd said, patting my hand. "This old place needs some cheer. You give it that." She'd been checking in regularly, concerned about the house's state, offering gardening tips for the overgrown yard. One Tuesday afternoon, she brought me a basket of late-season tomatoes from her garden. As she stood on my porch, chatting about her cat, Mr. Whiskers, I felt it, the cold spot. It didn't hover near the corner this time. It enveloped her. A visible mist formed in the air around her shoulders. Her cheerful chatter faltered. She shivered violently, pulling her cardigan tight. "Goodness, child," she murmured, her voice tight. "It's turned bitter cold all of a sudden, like a grave opened up." She left quickly, casting nervous glances back at my house. That night, the tapping was frantic. Tap, 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 tap. Not on the wall, but on the window, beside my bed. I fumbled for the lamp, my fingers numb with cold from the corner. The streetlight cast long shadows, but the window was empty. Only rain streaking the glass. Then I saw it, written on the fogged pane, as if drawn by an invisible finger. "Don't trust him. He watches. 3:07. My breath caught. Him? Who? The figure from my dreams? I pressed my palm against the cold glass, wiping away the condensation. The words vanished, but the message was seared into my mind. The next day was Saturday. I needed groceries. As I locked my front door, I saw Walter. He lived across the street in the only well-kept house on the block, a neat brick bungalow with manicured hedges. Walter was in his late 50s, retired military, always impeccably dressed in khakis and polo shirts. He'd waved hello a few times, offered to help carry boxes when I first moved in. He seemed normal, friendly, the kind of neighbor you'd want. He was raking leaves in his yard, his movements precise, efficient. He smiled and waved as I walked to my car. "Morning, Sarah. Settling in okay over there?" His voice was warm, reassuring. I forced a smile back. "Getting there, Walter. Thanks." As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. His smile had vanished. His eyes fixed on my house were flat and watchful, utterly devoid of warmth. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather slithered down my spine. He watches. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair. In the living room, a kitchen knife gripped in my sweating hand, the lights blazing. The house was unnaturally silent. No tapping, no pipes. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic pounding of my own heart. 2:45 a.m., 2:55 a.m., 3:15 a.m. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with agonizing slowness. 3:05, 3:06. At 3:07 a.m., the lights died, not a flicker. Total, suffocating darkness. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, pressing in on my eardrums. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with terror. The screen flared to life, casting a sickly blue glow. No signal. Battery at 1%. I was alone in the black. Then a sound from the kitchen, not tapping. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy boots on the linoleum. Coming down the hall, I scrambled back in the chair, the knife raised, tears streaming down my face. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room archway. The darkness felt alive, breathing. I could smell it now. The sweet, cloying scent of old flowers mixed with the sharp tang of damp earth. The cold spot wasn't a spot anymore. It was a presence filling the doorway. A shape coalesced in the gloom. Not the broad-shouldered figure from my dreams. This was different. Frail, hunched, wearing a shapeless old-fashioned housecoat. The face was indistinct, blurred like a photograph left in the rain, but the eyes, they held a deep, sorrowful intelligence. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking past me toward the front door. Its hand, translucent, shimmering like heat haze, rose slowly, not to touch me, to point, toward the door, toward the street, toward Walter's house. A sound escaped it, not a voice, but a vibration in the air, a dry rustle like dead leaves skittering on stone, carrying words directly into my mind. He comes, soon, at the turning dark. He knows you are alone. He knows the weak door. He takes the quiet ones. He took me. The image flashed in my mind, unbidden, horrifyingly clear. An elderly man, Arthur, his name surfaced in my terror, sitting in this very armchair. The basement door swinging open just a crack, heavy footsteps on the stairs, a gloved hand covering Arthur's mouth, the glint of a knife. The struggle was silent, over quickly. The body dragged down into the dark. The basement. 3:07 a.m., the time Arthur died, the time Walter always struck. The figure, Arthur, turned those sorrowful eyes on me. The cold intensified, biting into my bones, but there was no malice in it, only desperate urgency. The vibration came again, weaker now, fraying at the edges. Warn. Others. The widow. He watches her cat. Waits for her door to open. Stop him. Please. The front door rattled, not the wind, a firm testing shake of the knob, then a soft rhythmic scrape, metal on wood. He was picking the lock. Walter, he'd come for me, just as he'd come for Arthur, just as he'd planned to come for Mrs. Gable after he saw her. Leave my house, vulnerable and trusting. Panic surged, but beneath it, a fierce, protective anger ignited. Arthur hadn't haunted me to scare me. He'd tried to warn me. He'd tried to save Mrs. Gable. He'd spent years trapped here, trying to stop this from happening again. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't let Walter win. As the lock clicked open and a door creaked inward, spilling moonlight across the threshold, I didn't scream. I lunged, not at the shadowy figure stepping inside, the silhouette of Walter, tall and broad-shouldered, a dark shape in his hand, but toward the telephone on the hall table. Arthur's cold presence surged around me, a wave of icy energy that seemed to slow time. The air crackled. The overhead light fixture in the hall flared with a blinding blue-white light, shattering the bulb in a shower of sparks. Walter stumbled back with a curse, momentarily blinded. I grabbed the phone. Dead. No dial tone, of course. He'd cut the line. But my cell phone. I dropped it on the floor near the armchair. I scrambled for it. Arthur's chilling presence swirling around Walter like a shield, holding him at bay in the doorway. The phone screen was black. No power. 0%. Witch! Walter snarled, shaking off the disorientation, raising the knife, a long, wicked butcher's blade. Should have stayed quiet like the old man and the busybody next door. I threw the phone at him. It bounced harmlessly off his shoulder. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound, stepping fully into the hall. That's when I saw it. The basement door. Arthur had willed it open, just a crack, and the cold spot. It wasn't just cold anymore. It was a vortex, a pulling force. I didn't think. I ran, not toward the front door, but past Walter, toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen, toward the back door. Arthur's presence surged after me, a visible wave of frost spreading across the floorboards behind Walter's boots. Walter turned, confused by the unnatural cold biting at his ankles, the frost climbing the legs of his khakis. He slipped on the icy linoleum, crashing hard onto his back, the knife clattering away. I wrenched open the back door, stumbling out into the rain-slicked yard. I didn't stop. I ran straight to Mrs. Gable's house, pounding on her door until she opened it, blinking in her robe, Mr. Whiskers twining around her ankles. "Walter!" I gasped, rain and tears streaming down my face. "Call the police, now! He's in my house. He tried to kill me. He killed Arthur years ago. He's going to kill you next." Her face went pale, but she didn't hesitate. She pulled me inside, locking her deadbolt, and dialed 911 with shaking hands. I told the dispatcher everything. Arthur, the warnings, the cold spots, the writing on the window, the time, the basement, Walter's plan for her. I sounded hysterical, but Mrs. Gable stood beside me, nodding fiercely, her hand on my arm. "She's telling the truth," she told. The dispatcher, her voice surprisingly steady. "Walter Henderson has been odd, watching, asking about my routines, and Arthur Finch did disappear from that house in '98. They never found him." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. We waited in Mrs. Gable's warm, brightly lit kitchen, the smell of chamomile tea she insisted on making cutting through the fear. When the police arrived, they found Walter still in my hallway, shivering uncontrollably, frost coating his clothes and hair despite the indoor temperature, babbling about the cold man and the old one in the walls. They found the knife, and when they descended into the damp, root-cellar darkness of my basement, guided by Mrs. Gable's trembling finger pointing to a freshly disturbed patch of dirt near the old coal chute, they found Arthur Finch's bones. Walter confessed quickly. It was easier than fighting the impossible cold that had frozen his joints that night, he said. He'd killed Arthur over a disputed property line. He'd watched Mrs. Gable for months, waiting for the perfect moment when she'd be alone, vulnerable after letting her cat out. He'd seen me move in, alone and grieving, an easy target. "The house is weak," he muttered to the detectives, his teeth chattering. "It lets things in, things that don't like me. They tried to stop me before with the clocks, the stones, the cold." He refused to say more. I moved out the next week, sold everything I could carry. Mrs. Gable hugged me tightly at the bus stop, pressing a small, smooth river stone into my palm. "For luck, dear," she whispered, "and remembrance." I never went back to Sycamore Street, but sometimes, on quiet nights, when the world feels too loud and the grief for my old life resurfaces, I sit very still, and I listen, not for taps or footsteps, but for a different kind of silence, a warm, watchful quiet, because the cold spot in the corner of my new, well-lit apartment It's gone. Vanished. The moment Walter was led away in handcuffs. But in its place, there's a gentle warmth, like sunlight on old wood, like a hand resting lightly, reassuringly on my shoulder when the shadows feel too deep. Arthur isn't trapped anymore. He's free, and he's still watching, not to warn me of monsters in the dark, but to remind me that even in the deepest silence, I'm not alone. The house didn't haunt me. It saved me. And sometimes, in the safest moments, I swear I hear the faint, contented sigh of an old armchair settling. Just once. Then silence. The good kind.